Chapter 160. Just as he was about to follow, he saw Ling Xuan block his way. Third Prince, there are still many things to take care of in the Feng Manor today. It's inconvenient to greet you. Please go back as well. After glancing at him, Ling Xuan followed behind Fengjiu and walked inside, completely ignoring the frozen Murong Yixian. On the other hand, the 8 Phoenix guards to the side watched with interest. Based on what they knew, Murong Yixian was their eldest young Miss fiancé. However, looking at the situation, he would not be for long. You guys, come here and take care of this corpse. A Phoenix guard called over a few guards and had them take care of the scene. He then walked inside with large strides. Yi Xian. Murong Bo, who had already sat in the imperial carriage, called out. Father Emperor. He arrived in front of him and slightly narrowed his eyes as he called out. Come back to the palace with me. I have something to say to you. Murong Bo looked at his most outstanding son and knew that in the future, his cultivation would definitely be higher than his. Because of this, he had looked forward to him the most since he was young. Yes. Murong Yixian replied and mounted his horse. He glanced at the Feng Manor before leaving with them. Inside the Feng Manor the old man, Fengjiu, and Guan Shilin were all in Feng Zhao's room. At this time, the middle-aged doctor, after taking his pulse, shook his head and sighed, Master, eldest young miss, the master's body has suffered too much damage. My skills are lacking and I am powerless. The old man heard this and furrowed his brow. His face was dark, but the worry in his eyes could not be hidden. You can leave first. Fengjiu gestured for the doctor to leave first. Yes. The middle-aged doctor sighed. He bowed and walked out. Grandfather, don't worry. Father will be fine. She came to the old man's side and comforted him. She then sat down on the bed and took his pulse. Feng girl, you. When the old man saw her skillful pulse-feeling gesture, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Thinking that she had been investigating his body these days, the doubts in his heart couldn't help but emerge again. After taking his pulse, she took out the silver needles and spread them out. Then, she looked at the old man and revealed a smile. Grandfather should have heard of the ghost doctor, right? I've heard of him. It's said that he can even save someone who's on the verge of death. His voice paused, as if he had thought of something, and his eyes widened in shock. Little Feng, you mean? Yes, it's just as Grandpa thought. She winked at him. It's a secret. The old man widened his eyes in shock. He was surprised and happy at the same time. He found it unbelievable, ghost doctor. His granddaughter was the ghost doctor. What was going on? Is this true? Shilin, is what she said true? Grandfather Guan came to Guan Shilin's side, grabbed his arm and asked excitedly. Hee, Grandpa, it's true. Come, let me help you to sit over there. I'll tell you what happened. Guan Shilin grinned and helped the old man to sit down at the table in the outer room. He told him everything. In the inner room, Fengjiu began to treat her father with silver needles. After about half an hour, he put away his things and walked out. As soon as he came out, he saw the old man staring at him with shining eyes. That gaze was like staring at a glowing treasure, making her hair stand on end. Grandpa, are you okay? Little Feng girl, you've been hiding it from Grandpa for so long. Chapter 161. The old man adjusted his expression and said sternly, Don't worry, I will keep it a secret. He knew very well what kind of commotion it would cause if her identity as the ghost doctor was leaked. Now, to the people outside, most people guessed that the ghost doctor was from another country. If they knew that the ghost doctor was the eldest daughter of the Feng family, then the crisis would naturally follow. Yuan Yishuan. Although he was old, he was not muddle-headed. Naturally, he could see that she was indifferent to Yishuan after returning this time. This girl used to be very clingy to him, but now, sigh. Hearing this, her eyes flashed and said, "Find a time to cancel this engagement." "Cancel it? Are you serious?" The old man was slightly stunned. "That child, Yixuan, may be a prince, but we have watched him grow up. No matter how you look at it, there is no one in Yari country who can compare to him. Are you really going to cancel this engagement?" "Yes, cancel it," she said again, her tone very firm. Hearing this, the old man was helpless. He did not want to force her, so he said, "Since you insist on canceling it, then I will go to the palace another day to discuss it with the country." "Okay." She nodded in response. At this time, Leng Shuang, who was guarding outside the door, said, "Master, the 8 Phoenix guards are waiting outside the courtyard. They say that they want to see the old master and you." The people in the room looked at each other, then walked out. When the door opened, they saw that the 8 people in the courtyard were either sitting or standing. They quickly lined up in a row and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, old master, eldest daughter." "What is it?" the old man asked, his gaze sweeping over the 8 people. "We want to ask, old master, what arrangements do you have for us? Do you want us to stay or go back first?" A man in a black robe asked, looking at the old man. The old man looked at Fengjiu, paused, then said to them, "You can stay for now." "Yes," they answered and looked at Fengjiu. They didn't hide the fact that they were trying to figure her out. Fengjiu glanced at them, then turned to the old man and said, "Grandpa, I'm going to talk to the housekeeper about something. Dad will be fine with my brother here. You should go back and rest first." "All right, go ahead." As the old man spoke, he suddenly thought of something and hurriedly called out to her, "Feng lass, wait." After taking 2 steps, Fengjiu turned around to look at him. He saw him take out a token and hand it over. "This is the Phoenix badge. Seeing the badge is the same as seeing the master. Not only can it mobilize the Phoenix guards, but it can also order the Feng family's guards. This Phoenix badge will be given to you in the future. Use it well." Seeing this scene, the 8 people all had different expressions. They didn't think that the old man would just hand over the Feng badge like this. Was he at ease handing over the entire Feng family to the eldest young miss? Fengjiu was also a little surprised and asked, "Why is this thing with Grandpa? Isn't it with Father?" "Hee, your father's is a grandson. Grandpa's is an old man. This is more useful." The old man stroked his beard and said proudly. Hearing this, Fengjiu's mouth twitched. With this thing in hand, Grandpa is still worried that the Phoenix guards will fall into Su Ruoyan's hands. Hee, a grandson is also a treasure. Of course, it can't fall into the hands of an outsider. Moreover, the badge can mobilize the Phoenix guards, but more importantly, the Phoenix guards recognize the master. He looked at the 8 people meaningfully, and a wise smile appeared in his eyes. Chapter 162. Fengjiu couldn't help but smile, and her gaze swept past the 8 people before she said, "I'll take the command tokens. As for them, I'll deal with them when I'm free." As soon as she finished speaking, she walked towards the exit. After returning to Feng Manor, she began to clean up the people left behind by Su Ruoyun. In a short 3 days, she reorganized the manor from top to bottom. In these 3 days, Feng Zhao's body gradually recovered. Early in the morning, Fengjiu was practicing Tai Chi in the courtyard when she saw Ling Xuan walk in. "Master, 3rd Prince is here. He said he wants to see you. Old Master wants you to go over." She retracted her hand and exhaled softly, saying, "Got it. I'll change my clothes and go out." As she spoke, she walked towards the room. Her footsteps paused and she asked, "Oh right, how is my brother doing in the black market?" "Young master is doing well. Don't worry, master. The black market has already been informed." That's good." She nodded and went into the room to change her clothes. Then, she walked out with Ling Xuan to the front hall. In the front hall, Yi Xian. This old man knows that you are very outstanding, and this old man is also very satisfied with you. However, since Feng Girl has already said so, as a grandfather, I naturally can't say much. So, I'll tell you first today that I will enter the palace another day and report the situation to the monarch to annul this marriage. Hearing this, Murong Yi Xian looked at him and said, Grandfather Feng, don't enter the palace first. Wait until I've talked to Qingge first. That day, it was he who annulled this marriage. Now, it was she who wanted to annul this marriage. Was it because he didn't recognize her and was angry at him? Grandfather. A voice came from outside. Murong Yi Xian turned to look. With this look, his eyes narrowed. A woman in white walked in with her back to the light. Her elegant figure and elegant aura made her look as beautiful as a fairy. However, when he saw her face, the previous beauty disappeared without a trace. It was a face full of scars. Her original appearance could no longer be seen. The skin on her face was almost completely destroyed. It was very terrifying. Even if he saw it, his heart couldn't help but shrink. There was pain, pity, and also shock and astonishment. He never knew that her face was so thoroughly destroyed. Feng Girl, you're here. When the old man saw her, his eyes narrowed and he smiled. He stood up and looked at Murong Yi Xian and said, You two have a good talk. Then, he walked out. Qingge, let's get married. He looked at her and stated his purpose for coming. Hearing this, Fengjiu, didn't tell you that I wanted to annul the marriage? She walked to the main seat and sat, the servants to serve her tea to her, twos to test to twos. He thought that she wanted to break off the engagement because her face was disfigured. After all, she used to rely on him so much. How could she break off that kind of relationship just like that? Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled, I think you're mistaken. I don't want to annul the marriage because my face is ruined. It's because I realized that I don't love you, so I want to annul the marriage. Her voice was indifferent. Her expression was languid and elegant. She didn't feel a trace of uneasiness and inferiority because her face was ruined in front of him. I don't believe you. His gaze was fixed on her, I don't believe that you don't love me. We've been together for so many years. How can you say you don't love me? Chapter 163. That's different. He looked at her with deep affection. Because that's Su Ruoyan, not you. Pfft. She sneered and curled her lips. Which man doesn't love beauty? Don't tell me you weren't stunned when you saw me in the peach blossom forest. Weren't you surprised when you saw me on the street? If a man's words can be trusted, even a pig can climb a tree. Qingge. She drank a mouthful of tea and stood up. She walked in front of him and said, I'm definitely canceling this marriage. I'm not discussing it with you. I'm just informing you so that you can be mentally prepared. Then, she called out, Butler, see the guest out. The butler outside walked in and said to Murong Yi Xian, Third Prince, please. Murong Yi Xian was silent. After looking deeply at her, he said, I will find medicine to remove the scar for you. I will let you know that my feelings for you have never changed. Once he finished speaking, he then walked out. Fengjiu shook his head and sighed softly in his heart. Unfortunately, the Feng Qingge who loved you is already dead. No matter how much you do, it's useless. Then, she walked out of the front hall and went to the backyard. When she arrived at Feng Zhao's courtyard, she saw the old man and her father drinking tea and chatting. She called out, Grandfather, father. Qingge, I heard that Yixuan came. How did the two of you talk? Feng Zhao asked with concern. When he saw his daughter's disfigured face, his heart ached. His daughter's face was disfigured just like that. This was all because of his negligence as a father. He didn't protect her well and let her suffer so much. He's already gone. Grandfather, find a time to talk to the king and cancel this marriage. She walked to the table and sat down. Then, she looked at Feng Xiao. Father, do you still feel unwell? No, I'm fine. My body is recovering quickly. Feng Xiao smiled and told her not to worry. Well, you still have to continue drinking the medicine. She smiled and chatted with them in the courtyard. After a while, she returned to the courtyard. Not long after they returned to the courtyard, Ling Xuan walked in. Master. Just as he was about to speak, Ling Xuan saw a blue-robed man wandering around outside the courtyard. The words that were about to come out of his mouth suddenly stopped. Feng Jiu, who was in the courtyard, followed her gaze and saw the blue-robed man sticking his head out and looking around. Seeing this, she raised her eyebrows and asked, "What are you doing there?" I had nothing better to do, so I decided to take a stroll." He grinned as he stared at her naked face, feeling a little surprised. He had heard that eldest miss had removed her veil after she returned, revealing her disfigured face. She had been wandering around the residence all day long. He didn't believe it at first, but he didn't expect it to be true. "Do you have nothing to do?" She curled her lips and looked at him with a faint smile. "Speaking of which, you haven't recognized me as your master yet. Young miss wants us to acknowledge you as our master." This is probably going to be a little difficult." His words were very straightforward and blunt. "Master." Ling Xuan leaned close to her ear and whispered a few words. Then, he stepped back. After hearing Ling Xuan's words, Feng Jiu's eyes flashed with a faint light. Her gaze fell on the blue-robed man and she said to Ling Xuan, "Yes, go back and say that I agree." "Yes." Ling Xuan responded and left. Chapter 164. Ah! He was caught off guard by her fist and was hit in the eye. He cried out in pain and quickly retreated while covering his eye with one hand. "Eldest miss, why are you hitting people?" Feng Jiu smiled evilly, "Don't you solve problems with your fists. Since you've delivered yourself to my door and I'm itching for a fight, I'll use you as practice." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure flashed and rushed forward again. When he saw this, the blue-robed man let go and said, "Since it's like that, then eldest young miss, don't blame me for being merciless." This time, he didn't dodge, and he moved forward to greet her while swinging his fist fiercely towards her. However, he did not expect that his hand would be caught by her and the other hand would exchange blows with her. The sound of two fists colliding could be heard, accompanied by his cries of pain from time to time. He was not paying attention and felt that his whole body was suddenly lifted up and fiercely thrown to the ground. Bang! And the sound of a heavy fall was accompanied by his muffled groan. His whole body was pressed to the ground and he did not know where his hand was pinched by her. It was weak and powerless. Before he could catch his breath, he saw a fist coming towards him. He was so shocked that he shouted, "Don't hit my face." Bang 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 bang. "Ah! Why do you keep hitting my face? Don't hit my face. Don't hit my face. Ah!" The guards who heard the commotion thought that something had happened and quickly came over to take a look. Who knew that it was the Phoenix Guard who was being fiercely beaten up by the eldest Mississippi? For a moment, all of them widened their eyes in disbelief. How could the eldest miss beat the Phoenix Guard? Did the Phoenix Guard let her win? My stomach. Ah! Don't hit me, master, don't hit me, I admit defeat." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw that she had finally lifted her knee that was pressing against his stomach. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief and his whole body relaxed. However, just as he let out a sigh of relief and was unprepared, a fist fiercely landed on his stomach, causing his whole body to curl up like a cooked shrimp. He held his breath and his face turned red. "I, already, called, master. Why, still, hit me?" Feng Jiu stood up, brushed his clothes, and smiled at the man who was curled up on the ground with a swollen face. This last punch was taught to you by Master. Before the danger is over, don't let your guard down. Only when you know the pain will you remember this lesson. Looking at the figure who clapped her hands and walked into the room, he hissed. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain as he stood up and limped back. When the other men saw the man limping in, their eyes flashed with astonishment. One of them went up and asked curiously, "What's going on? Why did you come back with a bloody nose and a swollen face after going out for a stroll? Who hit you?" In this manner, other than the old master and the patriarch, is there anyone else who can beat you up like this? Hiss. Can you not ask first? Don't you see that I'm covered in wounds? Quick, help me sit down. It hurts so much. He grabbed the hand of the man beside him and leaned on him with all his strength as he said, "I sacrificed a lot today, but it was worth it." What happened? Several people surrounded him and watched. Seeing that the handsome face that he cared about the most was beaten into a pig's head, some of them could not help but laugh out loud. Chapter 165. That's right. I already told her not to hit my face, but she still chose to hit my face. She's too ruthless. The blue-robed man was so agitated that he pulled at the wound on his face. He sucked in a breath of cold air. I limped all the way back. When the servants saw me, they all covered their mouths and snickered. I had to cover half my face with my sleeves. I really don't have the face to see anyone. Could it be that your injury was caused by Guanxilin? It shouldn't be. With his strength, he's still no match for you. Could it be the old master? One of them guessed curiously. Hearing this, the blue-robed man's mouth twitched, revealing a proud smile. I knew you wouldn't be able to guess it. Because I couldn't guess it either, I had to pay such a painful price. Ouch, it hurts. He pulled the white-robed man and said, "Fan Lin, quickly bring me some medicine. It hurts so much. Let's make it clear first. Otherwise, you can apply the medicine yourself." The white-robed man, Fan Lin, sat on the side and didn't move. Seeing this, the blue-robed man said, "It was the eldest miss who hit me. She was very ruthless. Also, let me tell you." He lowered his voice, "Her strength is very strong, and her skills are also very strange. She's definitely above you and me." As he spoke, he pointed at the wound on his face. "Do you see? If I had the slightest strength to resist, I definitely wouldn't have let this handsome face of mine, which has charmed thousands of girls, be beaten into a pig's head." Hearing this, everyone was stunned. "Eldest miss? She was the one who beat you up like this? Otherwise, who else in the manor do you think has this ability?" He curled his lips and said, "I told you. This eldest miss is not simple. You don't believe me? Right, I just called her master. I just need to swear an oath." "You recognized her as your master?" They were a little surprised. He only went out for a trip, and he actually recognized her as his master. "That's right, I recognized her." "Ouch, quickly bring me some medicine and apply it." Fan Lin stood up and looked at the few people who were deep in thought. He then walked into the room and took out a medicine box to treat his wound. That night, Fengjiu went to her grandfather's room. "Little Feng, Ling Shuang said you had something to tell me in the evening. What is it?" The old man sat at the table and asked Fengjiu. Fengjiu picked up the teapot on the table and poured 2 cups of tea before saying, "Grandfather, the black market asked for my help. The spaceship they sent to pick me up will probably arrive tomorrow. This trip will take at least a few months, so I'll have to trouble you to keep an eye on things in the mansion." "Send a spaceship to pick you up?" The old man looked excited. "Is it that kind of flying magic tool? That's not something an ordinary country has. Could it be that the country you're going to is at least a 6th tier one?" She shook her head. "I haven't asked about this yet, so I'm not too sure. I'm thinking, should I tell father about the ghost doctor's identity? I don't want him to worry when I'm away for a few months." No need, no need. Your father shows everything on his face. If you tell him, he won't be able to hide it. If one day he's drinking with someone and is in a good mood, the entire Yunhua city will know. The old man waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, I'll tell your father that I let you go out to train and won't be back for a while." Hearing this, she couldn't help but tease, "Grandfather, are you sure you're not talking about yourself?" Chapter 166. Fengjiu chuckled. "You don't have to worry about that. Grandfather, look." She took out 3 bottles and placed them on the table. "What is this?" The old man took a sniff. He knew it was medicine, but he didn't know what it was for. "This is a spirit-enhancing pill that I developed for you. After taking it for a while, your amnesia should be cured." This can still be cured?" The old man looked at her in shock. Your symptoms aren't very serious. After eating this, you should be fine." She smiled. After telling him a few more things, she sat for a while before returning to the courtyard. The next day, before dawn, Fengjiu left quietly with Ling Shuang, heading towards the black market. Early in the morning, when the 8 Phoenix guards came to the courtyard to look for Fengjiu, they couldn't find her anymore. They originally thought that she had just gone out, so they didn't think much of it. Who would have thought that they would miss her for several months? When a luxurious flying ship flew over Yunhua City, the entire city was in an uproar. Even the king, Bo, in the palace, hurriedly sent people to find out what was going on. One had to know that even the country of Glorious Sun did not have a spaceship. Countries that owned spaceships were at least tier 6 countries or above, or only powerful forces could own such a flying instrument. After hearing the news, the palace guard hurriedly reported, "King, the flying ship stopped in front of the black market. It said that it's here to pick up the ghost doctor." "Pick up the ghost doctor?" Bo was startled. He stood up and immediately walked out with large strides. At the same time, he shouted, "Quickly prepare the horse." He still hadn't had the time to ask the ghost doctor for medicine, so how could he let him leave? Moreover, if he left, when would he come back? When Murong Yi Xian heard the news, he was also stunned. The ghost doctor? Was it that devilishly charming red-clothed man that night? Immediately, he came back to his senses and strode out. He was going to ask for medicine. To ask for medicine that could remove scars and restore his looks. Feng residence Feng Shao hurriedly walked out. When the butler saw him, he hurriedly stopped him and asked, "Master, your body hasn't recovered yet. Where are you going? Didn't you see the flying ship just now? It said that it's here to pick up the ghost doctor. I have to hurry to the black market and ask for some medicine that can remove Chinga's scars before he leaves." He pushed him aside and walked out. Without looking back, he said, "If the old master asks, tell him that I'll be back soon." "Master! Master! Hey, you guys, follow master, I'll go inform the old master." The butler hurriedly called a few guards to follow him while he ran to the backyard. What? He went to the ghost doctor to ask for medicine. The old man's eyes widened, his face full of shock. Yes. The patriarch's body hasn't recovered yet. If he ran out like that, I wouldn't be able to stop him. The butler said worriedly. Hurry, bring him to to me. To to, so, and he took T to go to Test one by one, they rushed to the black market. In a private room, several people were sitting and sizing each other up. I didn't expect the ghost doctor to be such a peerless young master. It's really better to meet him than to hear about him. Chapter 167. Fengjiu's lips curled into a faint smile. I'm flattered to have two great spiritual masters and a foundation establishment cultivator come and pick me up. Hearing this, surprise flashed across the eyes of the people in the room. They didn't expect him to be able to tell their cultivation level. However, they couldn't sense any profound energy or spiritual energy from his body. Then, how did he see through it? Hee, this is also to show how much our black market values you. Even if we're here to pick you up, we naturally can't neglect you. The middle-aged man said with a smile and cupped his hands. It's getting late. The flying ship is waiting outside. Please. He gestured for him to go ahead first. Fengjiu replied. He stood up and brushed the red robe on his body before walking out. Ling Xuan, who was guarding outside the door, was dressed in male attire. He was dressed in black with his hair tied up and a mask on his face. When he saw her come out, he followed beside her and went down together. At this time, the black market was already surrounded by people. They had heard of the ghost doctor before but had never seen her before. What kind of person was she? Therefore, when the magnificent red figure walked out from inside, the crowd cheered loudly after being stunned. Ghost Doctor! Ghost Doctor! It's the Ghost Doctor! Everyone pushed and jostled, wanting to go forward. However, the flying ship was surrounded by the black market's guards and they couldn't enter at all. Guan Shilin stood at the top of the black market and watched her leave. He didn't go near her because if he got too close to her, her identity would be exposed. Please. The middle-aged man gestured for him to board the ship. Fengjiu replied and stepped onto the flying ship. Ling Xuan followed behind. After they boarded the spaceship, it rose into the air and flew away from the ground, heading towards the sky. When Murong Bo, Murong Yishuan and Feng Xiao rushed over, they could only see the flying ship gradually getting further and further away. Not long after, it disappeared into the clouds. 3 days later, at night, in a hot spring behind the black market in Qingtang country. Fengjiu took off her clothes, took off her mask, and walked barefoot into the water. Her skin was also soaked in the water as she half squatted. She found a place to sit in the hot spring and placed her hands flat on the slippery stone beside her. She raised her head slightly and narrowed her eyes comfortably. The exhaustion from the past 3 days was soothed by the hot spring. It was so comfortable that she felt drowsy. She had already set up a formation outside the hot spring, and Ling Xuan was standing guard outside. Therefore, there was no need to worry about anyone breaking in. Although it was comfortable, she knew that she could not soak in the hot spring for too long. Therefore, after soaking for about an hour, she prepared to get up. However, just as she was about to stand up, through the steam of the hot spring, she vaguely saw a black figure flash in as if he was avoiding something. This caused her body, which was about to stand up, to sink into the water. With the help of the mist, her body was covered. Are you hiding from someone? Her lazy and slightly hoarse voice sounded so indifferent, and even revealed a sense of calmness, as if the sudden intrusion of a stranger did not startle her. The voice that suddenly came from behind made the black figure, who was leaning against the stone wall, startled. He instantly turned around and looked in the direction of the voice. Chapter 168. Looking through the mist, he could only vaguely see a figure sitting in the water. He could vaguely see a pair of perfectly round shoulders exposed outside the water, as well as a beautiful and enchanting snow-white neck. However, due to the hazy mist, he could not see the face clearly. However, judging from the other party's calm demeanor and lazy and slightly hoarse voice, the other party was obviously a man. After all, if a woman were to encounter such a situation, she would have screamed out loud. I'm sorry to disturb you. When he spoke, Fengjiu, who was in the water, widened her eyes in astonishment and almost exclaimed, Uncle. She and he really met everywhere in life, didn't they? She had just arrived at the Qingtang kingdom and she actually met him again. However, it was obvious that he did not recognize her. Thinking of this, she relaxed and leaned against the hot spring water. Looking at the figure standing upright by the side, the corners of her lips curled, revealing a teasing smile. I was shocked. I thought that someone from the black market had sent a beauty to me. I didn't expect that it would be a man. Hearing this, Ling Mohan's brows furrowed even deeper. His deep gaze looked through the mist, trying to see the person clearly. However, the person's next words made his mouth twitch uncontrollably. His face immediately darkened. You should know that I'm completely naked in the water. You're staring at me with such naked eyes. Could it be that you're interested in men? You're thinking too much, sir. His voice was a little stiff, but that masculine and magnetic voice was still so pleasing to the ear. Just as she was about to leave, she heard the sound of a search outside. She stopped in her tracks and suddenly turned back to look at the water. Just as she was thinking of how to get up, she suddenly saw him staring at her. She could not help but be startled. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something. However, before she could say anything, she saw him striding towards her. Stop right there. She shouted coldly. The mist could not block her vision at such a close distance. She was completely naked now. If he came closer, there would be nowhere for her to hide. Ling Mohan's footsteps did not stop, and he continued to walk in large, steady strides. A low and magnetic voice came out of his mouth. As far as I know, there should be another life gate in this array, and it's right behind you. Nonsense. Of course I know. Fengjiu's eyes widened as she looked at the figure walking towards her. She clenched her teeth and used her profound energy to scrape the surface of the water, causing the water droplets to fly towards him. At the same time, she slapped the surface of the water again, causing a curtain of water to splash up. Her entire body spun out of the water, and she took out a set of red clothes from her space. Using the curtain of water as a cover, she quickly put it on. However, just as the water curtain fell back into the hot spring, she put on her red clothes and landed on the ground. However, because she was barefoot, she slipped on the slippery stone and fell forward. Ah! She lost her balance and fell forward. She instinctively grabbed onto anything that could stabilize her body, but who knew that she would hear the sound of cloth tearing? She looked over in astonishment and was immediately dumbfounded. The uncle's pants were torn from the back, revealing the enchanting and eye-catching underwear inside. Chapter 169. Ling Mohan's face darkened as he turned around. He saw the disfigured man with disheveled hair staring at his pants in astonishment, as if he had been provoked by something. His mouth was wide open, and his hand was still holding onto the torn pants. Seeing this, he lifted his foot and kicked, "Let go." Plop. She was stunned as she was kicked into the hot spring. After drinking a few mouthfuls of hot spring water, she flopped her head out of the water, only to see that the man who was standing there a moment ago was gone. Hiss. You kicked me again. Just you wait. She slapped the water angrily and walked out of the water. When she heard the commotion outside, she quickly changed into a dry robe, rubbed her sore shoulder, put on a mask with a cold face, and walked outside. What's the noise? Her voice was cold, and she shouted angrily. Master. Leng Xuan came to her side and said, "They said that someone stole a few elixirs from the black market treasure house and chased that person here. They insisted on going into the hot spring to have a look." Fengjiu stared coldly at the black market guards in front of her. Her eyes fell on the middle-aged man who was the leader, and she lifted her foot to kick him. Bang! The middle-aged man was not prepared and was kicked in the stomach, and he rolled a few steps away. He gasped and shouted angrily, "What are you doing?" Fengjiu stepped forward and looked at him with cold and sharp eyes. "Who gave you the guts to be so presumptuous in front of me? Didn't my servant tell you that I was bathing inside? You!" The middle-aged man glared at her, but he did not dare to do anything to her. "Still staring at me? Don't you want your eyes?" Her voice was cold, and her eyes were cold. Her words shocked the middle-aged man, and he immediately lowered his head, not daring to stare at her. Humph! She snorted and waved her sleeves, then walked into the courtyard. After the two of them left, the middle-aged man raised his head and clenched his fists under his sleeves. His voice was filled with disdain and contempt as he said, "Someone from a small ninth-grade country really thinks he's someone important. If you make a fool of yourself tomorrow, I want to see what qualifications you have to be so frivolous." Back in the room, Ling Shuang saw that she was still angry. Thinking of the movement he had heard before, he could not help but blame himself and kneel down. "This subordinate has neglected his duty, please punish me." Sitting by the table, Fengjiu poured a glass of water and drank it. He waved his hand and said, "Get up. It has nothing to do with you." She lowered her head and said, "No, it's this subordinate who didn't guard well and allowed someone to sneak in and disturb master. Even I'm no match for that person, let alone you." She said nonchalantly, "Besides, I didn't lose anything. On the contrary, I took off his pants." Speaking of this, her face revealed a strange expression. Thinking of that red underwear, the corner of her mouth could not help but twitch. Ling Shuang, who was kneeling on the ground, could not help but raise his head in shock. "All right, rest well tonight." She indicated for him to go back and rest. She poured herself a few more glasses of water and drank it while thinking. Seeing this, Ling Shuang acknowledged and left. The next day. Chapter 170. Fengjiu responded. Seeing that she was somewhat full, she put down her chopsticks and wiped the corners of her mouth. Then, she walked towards him. "Let's go. Please." The middle-aged man's actions were respectful because he knew that the person in front of him was not an ordinary person. Naturally, he could not offend her. Although he was from a small ninth-grade country, he was not the least bit surprised or curious when he saw a flying ship for the first time. It was as if he was used to seeing flying weapons and could not arouse his curiosity at all. Moreover, after coming to the Green Ting Kingdom, he had displayed such calmness and elegance that no one dared to underestimate or neglect him. The middle-aged man brought Fengjiu to the main hall in front. After reporting to the inside, he said to Fengjiu, "Ghost doctor, please come in." Fengjiu walked in while Ling Shuang was stopped outside. The few people in the main hall did not hide the fact that they were sizing up the devilish red figure who walked in. Some of their eyes were filled with contempt and disdain while others were probing and judging. While they were sizing her up, Fengjiu's gaze swept past the few people in the main hall and landed on the person sitting in the main seat. That was a middle-aged man dressed in black brocade robes. His legs were steady as he sat upright. His entire body exuded the aura of a superior. At this moment, his sharp eyes were staring at her and sizing her up. "Sir, please take a seat." The middle-aged man sitting in the main seat said in a deep voice. He raised his hand and gestured, pointing to the first empty seat on the left. Fengjiu smiled and walked up to the first seat on the left. She turned around and was about to sit down when a force pushed the chair away. Seeing this, she glanced at a middle-aged man on the lower left. Seeing that the other party revealed a provocative gaze, she couldn't help but reveal a smile. She released a strand of profound energy from her palm, and the chair that was originally pushed back returned to its original position in the next moment, and she sat down calmly. Ga. The sound of the chair rubbing against each other was heard. Then, the middle-aged man on the lower left flipped his chair and fell to the ground. He exclaimed in shock. "Ah!" When the other people saw this, they couldn't help but reveal a smile and slightly avert their eyes. Seeing this, the middle-aged man's face flushed red. He stood up angrily and shouted at Fengjiu, "Do you know who I am? How dare you? How dare you make fun of me?" Hearing this, Fengjiu, who was sitting lazily, glanced at him and said, "Although I don't know who you are, I guess you're from the black market. They say that visitors are guests. Why? Is this how you treat your guests? You. Medicine Master Lin, Her Excellency the Ghost Doctor is right. Those who enter are our guests. We cannot be rude." The middle-aged man at the head of the table spoke. His deep voice carried a hint of authority, causing the embarrassed medicine master Lin to shut his mouth. At this moment, the others said, "President, look at him. He's still wearing a mask and looks like he doesn't dare to show his face. We don't know where he's from. How can we trust such a person?" "That's right, President. No matter what, we can't bet all of Qingting Black Market's reputation on this person. Look at him, he looks so lazy, and I don't think he's old. How can someone like him take on such a heavy responsibility?" Chapter 171. If I remember correctly, you guys were the ones who invited me to help. Feng Jiu looked at them with a half-smile. "Why do you make it sound like I'm the one who wants to help you?" She dusted her robe and stood up, saying, "Since you don't trust me, then find someone else. To be honest, I'm not interested in this matter." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't wait for them to say anything more and walked out. "Ghost Doctor, please wait." The man in the main seat spoke, and the guards outside the hall immediately stopped her. But just as they stopped her, they were sent flying by Feng Jiu's sleeve. "Get lost!" With a cold shout, the two guards flew out and fell to the ground with a muffled groan. The few people in the hall also stood up because of her sudden attack. Someone shouted angrily and pointed at her, "Men! Capture this impudent brat! All of you, stop!" The middle-aged man in the main seat shouted in a deep voice. The guards who were surrounding him stopped and looked at him. Even the few people in the hall looked at him. "Get out!" The middle-aged man walked over and shouted at the surrounding guards. Then, he looked at Feng Jiu and said apologetically, "Ghost Doctor, please don't misunderstand, I didn't mean it that way. It's just that this competition is no small matter. Our Qingting Black Market has lost for 3 years in a row, and we can't afford to lose again. Also, the higher-ups have said that if we lose again this year, my position as the president will be over, so." He said with a bitter smile. "President Ku." Feng Jiu looked at him and said, "Originally, I came to help because of the black market. But now that I'm here, President Ku, I'm very dissatisfied. If you still want me to help, then we have to talk about the reward." President Ku was stunned for a moment, then nodded, "Of course, as long as we win this competition, I won't mistreat you, Ghost Doctor." Hearing that, Feng Jiu smiled with satisfaction. "When is the spiritual medicine competition?" "It's 3 days from now." Feng Jiu walked in again, saying, "Then tell me clearly. That way, I can learn more about it." All right, all right, all right." President Ku saw the confidence in his words and his heart settled down. He told him about the elixir competition in detail. 3 days later today was the day of the annual competition between the pharmacists of Greenting Kingdom. Because the pharmacists sent by the black market of Greenting Kingdom had lost for 3 consecutive years, this year's competition was very important. When Feng Jiu arrived at the location of the competition, the peak of Mount Qingnan, he could see that the entire mountain was packed with people. Because they were participating in the large competition, they directly arrived at the top of the mountain before landing, avoiding the densely packed crowd below. After getting off the flying beast carriage, Feng Jiu's sharp eyes saw a familiar figure sitting in a conspicuous position on the stage. Seeing this, a strange look flashed across her eyes. She gestured with her chin and asked President Ku beside her. "Who is that bearded uncle?" "Bearded, uncle?" President Ku was stunned. Following Feng Jiu's gaze, his gaze landed on the tall man with a reserved aura. He couldn't help but smile, shaking his head. "Ghost Doctor, this is your first time in Greenting Kingdom, so you don't know that this person's identity is not simple." Chapter 172. His surname is Ling, and his name is Mohan. He is a teacher at the most famous school of stars and clouds in the Qingting Kingdom. His background is mysterious, and he is an immortal cultivator. His cultivation level has already reached the golden elixir level. More importantly, he is 25 years old, so you can call him a venerable or a senior. Only 25 years old? She had a strange look on her face and said, "Why does he have a beard at 25 years old? I thought he was at least 35 years old." That's why I said his background is mysterious, because no one has seen his real face before. He said with a smile, and his gaze fell on Ling Mohan. I didn't expect him to come here. Later, I'll pay him a visit. Ghost Doctor, do you want to come with me? The mysterious teacher at the School of Stars and Clouds? She nodded her head in realization, and no one knew what she was thinking. When she heard that he wanted to pay him a visit, she smiled. Of course, it's good to know such a strong person. Hence, President Ku led her to Ling Mohan. When they appeared, Ling Mohan noticed the devilishly charming man in a dazzling red robe. He was no stranger to the red robe and the red spider lily mask, because these two things were placed aside in the hot spring that night. Thinking of this, his sharp gaze fell on the man, scrutinizing him. That night, due to the mist from the hot spring, he was unable to see clearly. However, that disfigured face was clearly reflected in his eyes. At this moment, he had no choice but to admit that this red-clothed young man was as dazzling as the sun in the sky. His temperament was unrestrained and noble. Especially that pair of serene and smiling eyes, it was unforgettable. But looking at that pair of eyes, why did it feel somewhat familiar? Teacher Ling, long time no see. I didn't expect to meet you here. It's a pleasure, a pleasure. President Ku had already hurried forward to greet him with a smile. Hearing this, Feng Jiu couldn't help but smile. If President Ku knew that the man who stole his precious elixirs was the bearded man in front of him, he probably wouldn't greet him. So it's President Ku. He stood up and also cupped his hands in greeting. His gaze fell on Feng Jiu as he asked, "This is?" He's a pharmacist at our black market invited to participate in the spiritual medicine competition. This. And, he's called the Ghost Doctor. Because he didn't know what the Ghost Doctor's name was, he didn't know how to introduce her. Uncle Ling, Feng Jiu called out in a crisp voice. Her eyes were filled with a sly glint, and the corners of her lips curled up in an infuriating smile. She said as if they were familiar with each other, "If Uncle Ling thinks it's hard to call me Ghost Doctor, then you can call me Ghost. Hearing the word Uncle Ling, Ling Mohan unconsciously stroked the beard on his chin and looked thoughtfully at the young man in red in front of him. There was a strange and puzzled expression on his face. Uncle? It wasn't a matter of a day or two that he had a beard, but no one had ever called him that before. However, that crafty little girl he met in the Jiufu forest also called him uncle. This young man in red also called him uncle. Could it be that he really looked very old? She narrowed her eyes and grinned. That's right. I'm only 15 this year. I heard that uncle is already 25. That's 10 years older than me. If you're not an uncle, then what are you? Chapter 173. He couldn't help but size up the masked Ghost Doctor in front of him. Because he couldn't see his face clearly, he guessed that he was in his 20s based on his words and actions. But who knew that he said he was only 10 or 15? At this moment, he couldn't help but wonder if it was the right decision to bet the black market's reputation on him this year. Just as President Ku was wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, Ling Mohan looked deeply at Feng Jiu. He knew that the other party recognized him and knew that he was the man in black who had barged into the hot spring that night. A middle-aged man walked over and glanced at Feng Jiu in red with contempt. Then, he looked at President Ku and teased, 15. President Ku, where did you find this kid who is still wet behind the ears? Is there no one else in the black market? You actually invited such a little kid to participate in the spiritual medicine competition? Aren't you afraid that he will embarrass the black market? When President Ku heard this, he looked sharply at the middle-aged man and said rudely, "You don't have the right to comment on our black market's affairs. Your black market has lost for 3 years in a row." I can understand President Ku's feelings. The middle-aged man looked at him provocatively and pulled over an 18 or 19-year-old young man behind him. He smiled fawningly at Ling Mohan and said, "Teacher Ling, this is a kid." He was interrupted before he could finish his sentence. Ling Mohan didn't look at the father and son, only looking at Fengjiu and said, "Little brother, the spiritual medicine competition hasn't started yet. Why don't you walk with me?" "Sure." She smiled and said to President Ku, "I'll be back when the competition starts." President Ku looked at Ling Mohan in surprise, then looked at Fengjiu and replied, "Okay, okay, okay. Go ahead." Looking at the two of them, one in black and one in red, walking towards the mountain, he was puzzled. Did these two know each other? "What's your relationship with the black market?" Ling Mohan asked. Looking at the young man in red who was shorter than him, he frowned. No wonder he called him uncle. When he stood next to him, he really looked like a child who hadn't grown up. "As you can see, they asked me to help them get first place," she said casually and found a stone to sit on. He stared at him with his deep eyes and asked, "Have I seen you before?" Hearing this, Fengjiu looked at him. Hearing this, Ling Mohan only felt a chill, especially when the other party was staring at him like a wolf, which made him feel even more uncomfortable. "What's wrong with you?" Fengjiu, who got up at some point, leaned in front of him and asked, almost touching his chest. "What are you doing?" Ling Mohan's face fell and he took a few steps back. "I didn't do anything," she said innocently. Chapter 174. Seeing him fling his sleeves and leave, Fengjiu laughed softly and followed him with light steps. Before he could get close, he was stopped by President Ku. "Little brother Ghost Doctor, the competition is about to start. Come over here quickly, we'll tell you about the other party." He gestured, inviting him to walk towards the other pharmacists in the black market. Seeing this, Fengjiu stopped joking and followed President Ku to where the pharmacists were. She listened as they pointed at some people not far away and introduced their pharmacists' levels and what they were good at. Around an hour later, the spirit herb competition officially began under everyone's preparations and the announcement of the 8 judges from the Alchemists Association. The first round was an elimination round. There was no need for the pharmacists to compete, only the grades and types of the medicines presented by the pharmacists. After each type of medicine was evaluated by the 8 judges, it would be evaluated as qualified or unqualified, and thus eliminated. Qingxing Pharmacy, pain-suppressing powder, too common, unqualified. City South 1 Family, qi-melting liquid, unevenly mixed, too strong, unqualified. Scattered Medicine Association, hemostatic medicine, slow effect, not good, unqualified. Hearing the 8 pharmacists from the Pharmacist Association saying that their medicines were unqualified, the crowd below became more and more nervous. Actually, the medicines that they could take out for the competition were those that they felt were qualified. But, in the hands of the proper Pharmacist Association pharmacists, they were picky and felt that everything was unqualified. They were so strict that their hearts were in their mouths, afraid that their medicines would also be unqualified. With this refresh, out of the hundreds of pharmacists who came from all over the world, only 30 were able to enter the second stage. Those who passed were all from reputable clans and powers. Among them, there was a pharmacist from the School of Stars and Clouds. "Little brother Ghost Doctor, with your medicine, the only ones who can compete with you are the pharmacist from the School of Stars and Clouds, and the old man from the Pharmacist Association." He gestured, and continued, "The pharmacist from the School of Stars and Clouds did not participate in the competition in the past. I don't know why he is here this year. As for the old man from the Pharmacist Association, he has been first for 3 consecutive years. He is the pharmacist of the association, and a 7th-level pharmacist. What about the pharmacist from the School of Stars and Clouds? What rank is it?" Her eyes flashed as a thought formed in her mind. Everyone said that it was difficult to enter the Academy of Stars and Clouds. However, if she entered as a pharmacist and became a teacher, wouldn't she be able to freely read through the treasures of the Academy of Stars and Clouds? The alchemist insignia on his chest indicates that he is a Tier 3 alchemist. His potioneering skills are above that old man's. Speaking up to this point, guild leader Ko could not help but sigh. He already felt that it was impossible for them to win this year. If it was only the 7th rank pharmacist, it would have been better. However, this year, even the pharmacists from the School of Stars and Clouds had come. This blocked his path forward. It seemed that his position as the president had reached its end. Little brother Ghost Doctor, just do your best. Even if you lose to a rank 3 alchemist from the School of Stars and Clouds, it is not shameful. Fengjiu's lips curled into a faint smile. We haven't even started yet. How do you know you lost? Next, the second test will begin. The 30 pharmacists that have been selected, please come up to the stage. The words that came out from the stage caused the surrounding people to fall silent. They saw a messy pile of medicinal herbs on the long table on the stage. 30 pharmacists walked out from the crowd and went up to the stage. Chapter 175. The red robe fluttered and the crowd could only see a red shadow flashing across the stage. A figure cried out and fell off the stage. Ah! A pharmacist fell to the ground in a sorry state. He was scratched by the sharp stones on the ground. Because he fell in the wrong way, he could not stand up. On the stage, a young master dressed in red stood. His robes fluttered in the wind, and his mask, which was covered with blooming red spider lilies, reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight. Everyone could only see a faint smile on his lips, and his entire body emitted a cold and evil aura. His gaze was contemptuously looking at the middle-aged alchemist who was sitting in a sorry state below the stage. When Ling Mohan, who was sitting on the stage, saw this scene, his deep black eyes flashed with a faint light as he stared at the cold and evil figure. He saw the figure suddenly turn around and meet his sharp eyes without warning. It was also at that moment that the light in his eyes dissipated. He sat there quietly, his face stiff and his expression solemn. Fengjiu looked at him in surprise. He felt that this uncle was a person who hid very well. She had interacted with him many times. However, it seemed that every time she interacted with him, she could find a different side of him. What kind of person was he? The crowd on the stage only glanced at the pharmacist who fell off the stage and did not pay attention to him. The middle-aged man secretly pushed the young man in red. Many people saw it. Therefore, it was not surprising that he was kicked off the stage by the young man in red. The head of the family that the middle-aged pharmacist belonged to had a gloomy face. He waved his hand and said, "Send him down the mountain." They stared gloomily at the red figure. Because they knew that he was from the black market, they did not dare to openly make things difficult for him. A middle-aged man standing next to the pile of herbs on the stage gave each person a list of herbs and said in a deep voice, "Pick up the herbs on the list. The first 10 people to pick up all the herbs on the list will enter the next round. The rest will be eliminated. Begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the pharmacists on the stage picked up the herbs on the list in their hands and fought for the herbs on the table. When the teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds finished picking up the herbs and walked out, he could not help but glance to the side. He glanced at the young man in red who was holding the herb basket and frowned. Fengjiu turned his head slightly and smiled at him. Not long after, 10 people emerged victorious. After the others were eliminated, they immediately entered the final round of the competition. They had to concoct medicine on the spot. The higher the grade of the medicine, the less likely the winner would be. Looking at the dozens of herbs on the table, Fengjiu began to concoct them. Her concoction method was different from others. Even if others saw it, they wouldn't be able to learn it. That was because it was like a modern experiment. Layer by layer, it was processed and refined before it finally took shape. After she concocted a bottle of green liquid, she walked to the 8 appraisers of the Alchemist Association and placed the potion in front of them. Please examine it. This is medicine. What a beautiful color. One of the female judges, who was in her 30s, looked at the half-filled bottle of medicine in amazement. She found it hard to believe. Beautiful and elegant sister, this is indeed a potion. I'm not lying to anyone. She winked at her. Her seductive smile and smiling eyes made the 30-year-old female apothecary blush slightly, blush appearing on her face. Chapter 176. At this moment, Fengjiu tilted his head slightly, looked at Ling Mohan and asked with a smile, "Uncle Ling, why are you staring at me?" Hearing this, the female alchemist couldn't help but smile. She looked at Fengjiu with a gentle gaze. "Young man, why don't you tell me the effects of this bottle of medicine?" This bottle of medicine is a level 3 speed increasing medicine. As long as you consume it, your speed will increase by 10 times. Even if a martial practitioner is being chased by a martial master, as long as you drink this bottle of medicine, you will have enough speed to escape. Hearing this, everyone on and off the stage took in a breath of cold air. Pairs of eyes stared at the green bottle of medicine. If what he said was true, then this medicine wasn't as simple as a medicine. It was a bottle of spiritual liquid that could save lives at critical moments. Humph. Preposterous. The alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds walked over and placed the medicine on the table. He glanced at Fengjiu and said, "This is simply preposterous. I have been in contact with medicine for so many years, but I have never heard of a speed-increasing medicine. This is simply nonsense." "That's right. Just based on your age and you are only a level 3 alchemist, you can tell that there is a limit to your medicine refining skills." Her casual words made the old alchemist so angry that his face turned red. He angrily pointed at her and said, You have no respect for your elders. You are simply arrogant and conceited. Ignorant. Alright, stop arguing. This bottle of medicine is indeed a level 3 advanced medicine. The old alchemist in the middle opened his mouth. Everyone was silent. Even the alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds widened his eyes. "President Yu, are you sure? This young man can refine a level 3 advanced medicine?" Hearing this, President Yu was displeased. "Elder Chen, are you doubting my appraisal skills?" Seeing his displeasure, the alchemist teacher from the School of Stars and Clouds quickly adjusted his attitude and respectfully said, "I don't dare. President Yu is the president of the Alchemist Guild. You are the authority of the alchemist world. Naturally, you are experienced and knowledgeable. I lost my sense of propriety, please don't blame me." As he spoke, he looked at Fengjiu with a complicated gaze. He couldn't believe that he had lost to a young man. Ling Mohan's eyes moved slightly, and when his gaze fell on the young man in red, he narrowed his eyes slightly. When the president of the black market heard President Yu's words, he was so excited that tears almost fell from his eyes. "It's actually a 3rd-grade spirit liquid. It's actually a 3rd-grade spirit liquid." He originally thought that there was no hope, but who would have thought that there would be such a pleasant surprise in the end? How could he not be excited? Just then, 16 people in black appeared. Among them, 10 were at the peak of the foundational level while the other 6 were in the golden core. The moment they appeared, a powerful chi permeated the air and engulfed the entire mountain. Hiss! They're from the Yen Palace. What? Were they from the Yen Palace? Run! Ah! Run! The people from Yen are here. In a moment, the crowd was in a panic. Screams and shouts echoed throughout the mountain. Seeing that the situation was not good, Fengjiu immediately rushed down the stage and shouted, "Ling Shuang, run down the mountain quickly." Just as the word "run" left her mouth, a powerful chi came down on her, causing her body to stiffen. In the next moment, she felt a pain at the back of her neck and she lost consciousness and fell down. Master. Chapter 177. Ling Mohan chased after him, but came back not long after. He apologized to the crowd, the other party came quickly and left quickly as well. I can't see his whereabouts anymore. The people from the Alchemist Guild all shook their heads when they heard this. President Yu sighed, it's not your fault. The people from Yandian have always been elusive and powerful. I'm afraid that the young man was targeted by them because of his talent in alchemy. What kind of power is Yandian? Will my master be in danger? Ling Xuan came in front of them and asked anxiously. The president of the black market walked over and said, Yandian's power is even greater than the black market. Regardless of whether it's the School of Stars and Clouds or the various clans, they are a power that no one can afford to offend. That Yama Lord is even more mysterious. No one knows where Yandian's base is. Little brother Ghost Doctor has fallen into their hands. I'm afraid that things are not looking good for him. No. My master will be fine. She shouted loudly and looked coldly at the president of the black market. Your black market has to help me find my master. Don't worry, we will find out where your master is. President Ku did not decline this point. You can rest assured. According to what I know, Yandian has recently captured many alchemists and pharmacists. Perhaps, your master will not be in danger. The president of the Alchemist Guild sighed as he said this. A good elixir competition was originally meant to select talents, but who knew that the people from Yandian would turn it into this? The news spread like a feather in the wind, causing people to sigh endlessly. Everyone was guessing whether the red-robed young man was alive or dead. And, as night fell, a black figure silently arrived at a house in a few leaps. Greetings to the Yama Lord. The 16 black-robed cultivators in the courtyard respectfully knelt down on one knee. Rise. A low and cold voice containing a powerful aura came out. He brushed his robes and sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. As he turned and sat down, his face was also revealed. It was an astonishingly handsome face. His facial features seemed to have been carefully carved by the heavens, and the contours of his face were as sharp as a knife. He was cold and hard, but he did not lose his handsomeness. Under his sharp eyebrows, there was a pair of deep eyes that contained a mysterious light, containing a sharp and intimidating edge. With just a glance, it made people involuntarily lower their heads, not daring to meet his intimidating black eyes that contained a powerful pressure and sharpness. And under that high nose, his thin sexy lips. They were slightly pursed and his whole body emitted a cold and intimidating aura, noble like a god, but also like the king of the world. If Fengjiu at this moment. That's right, the master of Yandian, the Yama Lord, was Ling Mohan, whom Fengjiu was familiar with. Ling Mohan was only a fake identity he used to enter Xingyun as a teacher. The beard on his face was also carefully pasted on, enough to pass off as the real thing. How is he? The Yama Lord asked in a low voice. His low voice revealed a trace of laziness and the aura of a superior. Replying to the Yama Lord, the boy we caught is still unconscious. He hasn't woken up. A black-robed cultivator said respectfully. Take good care of him. Tomorrow, follow me back to Yandian. Hearing this, the 16 black-robed cultivators were all delighted. Master is going back to Yandian. Chapter 178. When the 16 of them heard this, they immediately flew toward the back. Seeing this, the Yama Lord stood up. Just as he was about to walk toward the back, he stopped in his tracks and rubbed his chin. Then, he took out half of the silver mask from the space and put it on before he walked toward the back. When he reached the back, he saw that the red figure on the roof was circling around his subordinates like a ghost. The speed at which he retreated and the ferocious attacks made the Yama Lord's eyes light up. When they were at the top of the mountain, the Yama Lord had knocked him out when he was unprepared. Now that he was on guard, the 2 foundation establishment cultivators under him were unable to take him down. He had to admit that he had impressed the Yama Lord once again. Unfortunately, it was impossible for him to escape now that he had fallen into his hands. Hiss. One of the Foundation establishment cultivators in black was kicked by Fengjiu. He took a few steps back and rubbed his aching chest as he cursed under his breath. Fuck. What did you eat growing up? Why are your legs so strong? Fengjiu retracted his leg and threw a punch at another Foundation establishment cultivator who was approaching him. He sneered, "Of course I grew up drinking breast milk." Hearing this, the Yama Lord, who was standing below with his hands behind his back, smirked. His deep gaze landed on the red figure and he ordered, "Take him down." Yes. The Golden Core stage cultivators who were watching from the side immediately responded. Two of them flew out, and a strong pressure enveloped the area. With one move, they captured Foam 9. Fuck. Not only are you bullying me with numbers, but you're also bullying me. Hiss. This is so awkward. My hands. She screamed in pain and glared at them in anger. This was the difference in strength. In this world, the strong were respected. Even if her strength was considered one of the best in the country of Glorious Sun, she was still vulnerable in the face of these powerful cultivators in a mid-tier 6th-tier country. In the face of such a strong opponent, she knew that she could not escape, but she still wanted to try. As expected, her hands were twisted behind her back. Hiss. Usually, he didn't feel any pain when he twisted other people's hands. Why did he feel as if his bones and tendons were about to be dislocated when he was twisted in the opposite direction? Master, we've captured her. Two Golden Core cultivators held her captive in front of the Yama Lord. Fengjiu raised her head and saw the man in a black robe with dark patterns standing in front of her with his hands behind his back. Although the other party's face was covered by half a silver mask, revealing only his sexy thin lips below his nose and his cold and hard chin, but his slender and strong physique, his strong and straight figure, and the aura he exuded, still made her eyes light up. At that moment, she whistled like a rich playboy and praised, "What a sexy and seductive man." Seeing him act like a hoodlum in front of their master in front of everyone, the 16 black-clothed cultivators were stunned. They quickly glanced at their master and quickly lowered their heads to hide the uncontrollable smile on their faces. A sexy and alluring man. Talking about their master. This young man probably doesn't want to live anymore. When the Yama Lord heard Fengjiu's words, he raised his eyebrows and the corners of his mouth curled into a wicked smile. Sexy. Seductive. Maybe I can take it as a compliment. However, no matter how one listened to it, that low and magnetic languid voice seemed to contain a fatal danger. Praise, praise beauty. Chapter 179. At this moment, Fengjiu was slightly startled. She stared at the man in front of her and thought to herself, why does this voice sound so familiar? Could it be that I've seen this person somewhere before? That's impossible. This man's aura was so outstanding. If she had seen him before, she definitely wouldn't have forgotten him. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly saw the man in front of her shoot out a few streams of air. She felt her entire body go limp and she fell to the ground. Lock him up. If he escapes, I'll hold you responsible. The Yama Lord ordered in a deep voice. He flicked his sleeves and turned to leave. Yes. The 16 black-clothed cultivators respectfully responded and pulled up the youth who had fallen to the ground. After her body went limp, she felt that the Xian energy in her body had been sealed. Fengjiu's heart skipped a beat. She said, my Xian energy has been sealed by your master. You don't have to pull me, I can walk on my own. Moreover, with you all guarding me, how can I escape? Heh, I advise you not to think about escaping. If you try to escape again, I'll break your legs. One of the cultivators threatened. He released her hand and said, let's go. Fengjiu, who was locked up in the room again, knew that she couldn't escape and didn't have any other thoughts. However, only she knew that the man had only sealed her Xian energy. He didn't know that she had spiritual energy in her body. In this way, as long as she found the right opportunity, she might be able to escape. However, before that, she wanted to understand why these people had captured her. Yama Palace? She didn't remember offending such a power. The next morning, Fengjiu was brought onto a flying boat. When the flying boat left the ground and flew into the sky, Fengjiu, who was originally sitting inside, walked out. She saw the man sitting at the bow drinking wine and was about to walk over when she was stopped. Let him come over. The Yama Lord ordered without turning his head. Fengjiu walked over and sat down without hesitation. She poured herself a cup of wine and took a sip. She asked, "Whose life are you capturing me to save? Or are you coveting my alchemy skills?" Although these people had a strong murderous aura, they didn't want to kill her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived until now. As for her, she reckoned that the only thing that could catch people's attention was her medical skills and alchemy skills. Seeing his casual and calm appearance, the Yama Lord's eyes revealed a look of admiration. "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? If you wanted to kill him, you would have done so long ago." She touched her stomach and asked the guard, "Hey, is there anything to eat? Give me some food, I haven't eaten anything since yesterday." The guard glanced at Yen Zhu, and after receiving his signal, he walked into the spaceship. Not long after, he brought out a few plates of pastries and placed them on the small table. "Yama Yamazes, the Yama Lord's eyes, eat slowly, there's more, there's, of the Yama of Yama, Yayama." Cough, cough, cough. It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but as soon as he spoke, Fengjiu was so shocked that she choked. The pastry was stuck in her throat, unable to go up or down, and her disfigured face flushed red. The Yama Lord frowned. He watched as Fengjiu poured a cup of water from her chest and gulped it down. She took a deep breath and glared at him. Chapter 180. His black pupils turned, and he saw that the subordinates of the Golden Core cultivators were also looking at him in astonishment. He frowned and swept his gaze over them. "What are you standing there for? Don't you have anything else to do? Leave." "Yes." The Golden Core cultivators hurriedly responded. As they retreated, they glanced at the red-robed youth. They really couldn't tell what was so special about this youth. How could he make their master so gentle? Fengjiu glanced at him, then ignored him and continued to eat the pastries. This time, he ate more slowly. Moreover, a trace of doubt flashed through his half-closed eyes. Why did that voice sound so familiar? Where had she heard this person's voice before? In the evening, the flying ship stopped on a flat ground. After the Yama Lord got off the flying ship, she followed closely behind. However, her eyes were soon covered by some black cloth. He was led by them all the way, and after a long journey, he heard many people calling out respectfully to welcome the King of Hell back. Take him to change his clothes and send him to the medicine pavilion. After hearing the Yama Lord's voice, she was led to a room. A cultivator removed the black cloth covering her eyes and threw a set of grey robes to her. "Quickly change and come with me." Seeing the cultivator standing in the room and staring at her, she glared at him. "Get out. How can I change my clothes if you keep staring at me? We're all men, what's there to be afraid of? Hurry up and stop nagging." It was a Golden Core cultivator, a man in his 20s. He was also one of the 16 people who came back with them. His name was Hui Lang. "I'm not used to being stared at." She frowned. "You're so troublesome. If you don't change, I'll help you change." As he spoke, he really took large strides towards her and made a move to take off her clothes. However, before he could get close, Fengjiu shouted at the top of his lungs, "Ah! Molestation!" The door was suddenly pushed open, and several cultivators outside poked their heads in. When they saw the situation in the room, they couldn't help but stare. Who's molesting who? One of them stared at the two people in the room for a moment, then smiled mischievously. He stared at the golden core cultivator and said, "Hui Lang, I didn't expect you to have such a hobby." Scram! The golden core cultivator's face darkened. He glared at Fengjiu and ordered, "Two of you. Take off this brat's clothes." Hearing this, Fengjiu's eyes narrowed. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and a smile bloomed on his lips. "Take off my clothes? Come up and give it a try. Do you think I don't dare?" Hui Lang stepped forward and reached out to pull his clothes. Feng Nine was not polite to him. Seeing him step forward, she immediately took advantage of his strength and threw him away. At the same time, she moved her fingers, and a silver needle with cold light pierced into the acupoint on his waist and abdomen at a speed that was too fast to be heard. Hiss! Unexpectedly thrown to the ground, Hui Lang's anger rose. He clenched his fist and was about to use his spiritual power when he heard a cold voice. "Stop! Master!" Seeing that it was the Yama Lord, everyone bowed their heads. The Yama Lord walked in with a frown. He coldly glanced at the two people and asked in a low voice, "What's going on?" "I want to change my clothes, but he won't go out. He insists on staring at me and wants to take off my clothes." Chapter 181. "Mistress, it's not like that," Hui Lang said anxiously. "Then what is it?" Fengjiu crossed her arms and glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. "Do you dare say that you didn't want to watch me change? Do you dare say that you didn't want to take off my clothes? You! What about me? Although this young master's face is ruined, my eyes are still very picky. With your washboard-like body and your pretty boy face, you really can't enter this young master's eyes." Her face was full of disdain and her words were light as a feather, but the words that came out of her mouth made everyone in the room fall silent. They all stared at her as if they were staring at a monster. Even the grey wolf widened his eyes, his face full of astonishment. The Yama Lord's mouth twitched imperceptibly. He looked at the young man's self-righteous and shameless expression and couldn't help but look away. He turned and walked out. "Hurry up and change your clothes," Hui Lang said fiercely, then quickly turned and left. When the others saw this, they all looked at Fengjiu curiously. They were very surprised. They really couldn't tell that this young man was gay. Seeing them leave one by one, Fengjiu stepped forward and closed the door. She couldn't help but smile. She looked at the grey robe in her hand and quickly changed into it before walking out. "Follow me." Hui Lang looked at Fengjiu with disgust and walked in front to lead the way. Fengjiu glanced outside. There were only a few cultivators left. As for the Yama Lord, he was nowhere to be seen. Her gaze fell on Hui Lang in front of her and a faint light flashed in her eyes. She pursed her lips and walked leisurely behind him until they arrived at the courtyard of a 7-story building. The strong smell of various herbs assailed her nostrils. Many people were busy in the large courtyard. Some were drying herbs, some were grinding herbs, and some were classifying herbs. Everyone had a different division of labor. Moreover, these people seemed to be used to newcomers coming in every once in a while. Therefore, when a disfigured youth came in, many of them only raised their heads to take a glance at him in their busy work and continued with their work. There were even some who didn't even look in his direction. "Elder Lin, I'll leave this kid to you," Grey Wolf shouted. He left Fengjiu behind and didn't even look at Fengjiu. At this time, an old man in green walked out of the building. He looked at Fengjiu and asked, "What's your name?" Fengjiu grinned and said loudly, "Ghost." "Ghost?" The old man was stunned and frowned. "What do you know? Tell me, I'll arrange a job for you." Fengjiu didn't answer him. "What are you all doing here? Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Otherwise, you'll die very quickly." Hearing this, she raised her eyebrows and thought for a moment, then arranged for me to do odd jobs. I still know how to be an assistant. As she spoke, she looked into the building and saw that there seemed to be many people on the first floor. That's where the herbs are mixed. The newcomers are all doing odd jobs in the outer courtyard. You can go there and classify the herbs first. The old man gestured and turned to go back to the first floor. Fengjiu looked inside and walked to the herbs. As she sorted the herbs, she looked around. Chapter 182. Feng Nine glanced at him and casually put away a medicinal herb. She said, "He was caught." "Caught? Are you a pharmacist?" The young man asked in surprise. "Why do you say that?" Fengjiu raised his eyebrows. The young man glanced inside and said in a low voice, "Every once in a while, someone will be caught and brought in. However, those who are caught are all pharmacists." "Ah, they are all in the building. Those of us outside are at most apprentice pharmacists who do odd jobs. If they are all in there, how do you know that they are all pharmacists?" "That's because a man kept making a ruckus last time. That's how we found out." "Oh." She nodded and did not ask anything else. In her heart, she was thinking, what is this Yama Palace trying to do by setting up such a medicine building and capturing so many pharmacists? On the other side, in the study of the main courtyard. "Master, the others are waiting in the main hall." Hui Lang reported respectfully. The Yama Lord, who was sitting at his desk, looked at Hui Lang and asked, "Have you made arrangements for him?" Hearing this, Hui Lang could not help but look up at him. When he met his cold and majestic gaze, he quickly lowered his head and replied, "Yes, your subordinate brought that kid to the medicine building and handed him over to Elder Lin." The king of hell put down the brush in his hand as a powerful aura filled the air. His deep voice was cold as he said, "His ability to refine medicine is not bad. The medicines that have been circulating in the black market for the past few months have all come from his hands. I seem to have already told you about this." Feeling the pressure from his body, the atmosphere in the room became colder. Hui Lang was shocked and knelt down on one knee. "Master, please calm down. Your subordinate only wanted to make that kid suffer a little. Your subordinate will immediately bring him into the building." He originally thought that his master only said to bring him to the medicine building and did not say to bring him into the building. That was why he wanted to take advantage of this loophole to break the kid's spirit. He never thought that his master would ask about it. "You've been by my side for a few years now. You should know that I don't like people who play tricks. If there's a next time, you'll have to go back to the Black Dungeon for training." Hearing the cold voice, Hui Lang was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. Yes. This subordinate will definitely remember this and not commit it again. Black prison, that was really a hell, he did not want to go back there. The Yama Lord withdrew his pressure and leaned back. He glanced at Hui Lang, who was kneeling on the ground, and paused for a moment. Then he said, "That young man is indeed cunning. Let him stay in the medicine house for a few days." "Yes." Hui Lang answered. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. When night fell, Fengjiu followed them to the courtyard where they were resting. When he saw the row of large beds, he could not help but be dumbfounded. We're sleeping here tonight? Heavens! It couldn't be, right? She had to sleep with a bunch of men. If her father and grandfather knew about this, they would probably be hopping mad. Otherwise, do you think there's a separate room? A big man next to him glanced at him. He took off his clothes and said, "It's already good enough to have you to sleep with." Looking at the dozen or 20 people in the room, some took off their clothes, some took off their shoes, and some simply slept with their upper bodies bare. Fengjiu frowned and turned to leave. What a joke. Let her sleep here. She was not going to sleep. After leaving the room, she looked around the courtyard. Seeing that there were guards outside the courtyard, she could not go out. Thus, her gaze turned and fell on the big tree in the courtyard. Her eyes lit up. Chapter 183. When the guards in black heard the commotion behind them, they turned around and saw the young man climbing up the tree on all fours. One of them shouted, "What are you doing? Come down." Fengjiu glanced at the two of them and said, "Stay on guard and don't meddle in other people's business." "You." The guard in black was about to step forward when he was pulled back by the person next to him. "That kid is very strange. Don't bother about him. He didn't go out anyways. Let him be." The guard in black saw that Fengjiu had found a place to sleep on the tree and couldn't help but scold. He didn't sleep on a good bed but went to sleep on a tree. "I think this kid is sick." Fengjiu couldn't be bothered to pay attention to them. She hadn't had a good rest since she was brought here. Although it was a little cold outside, it was still better than sleeping with 10 or 20 people inside. After spending 2 days in the courtyard, she had more or less figured out the rules of the medicine tower. Only pharmacists could enter the tower, and the higher the grade, the more valuable the medicine they could concoct, the better the status and treatment in the Yen Palace. Moreover, although many people were captured, because of the treatment, they gave up the idea of leaving and wholeheartedly stayed in the medicine tower. It was said that as long as one could concoct a more valuable medicine, in addition to the proper reward, they could also find a beauty in the beauty tower to have fun with for a night. As long as one was sincerely loyal to the Yen Palace, they would be allowed to return home every once in a while. As for the beauty tower, it was said that the Yen Palace had nurtured it to be an information network. The Yen Palace had beauty towers in various places, similar to brothels. The beauties in the beauty tower were gathered from all over the place. Each of them had exquisite and enchanting figures and beautiful faces. Even those old-fashioned pharmacists would be intoxicated by the gentle fragrance of the beauties once they went in. For the first time, she was curious about the master of the Yen Palace. What kind of person was the Yama Lord? "What are you thinking about?" A low and magnetic voice suddenly sounded in her ear. This made her, who was in a daze, answer without thinking, "I'm thinking about what kind of man the Yama Lord is." As soon as she said that, the shadow guards who were guarding the secret corner of the medicine tower twitched their lips. So this brat was actually thinking about their master in broad daylight? His guts were really big. The bustling sounds in the courtyard suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked at him strangely. When their gazes fell on the man beside him, everyone hurriedly withdrew their gazes and continued with their own matters. Fengjiu came back to his senses. When he saw the man standing beside him, his eyes lit up and he grinned. He, so it's the Yama Lord. I haven't seen you for a few days and you seem to have become even more handsome. The Yama Lord's deep eyes fell on his scarred face. He looked at the heartless smile on his face and said in a deep voice, "Come in with me." Then, he walked into the building with his hands behind his back. Seeing this, Fengjiu quickly followed. When he took a step, he caught a glimpse of Hui Lang's haggard expression from the corner of his eye. He couldn't help but smile happily. Hui Lang didn't seem to hear Fengjiu's words. His expression was a little absent-minded and there was anxiety in his eyes. He had dark circles under his eyes and his face was a little ugly. Chapter 184. This is where the pharmacists concoct the medicine. There's another floor on the second floor. As for the third floor, there are some books on medicine. The fourth and fifth floors are for medicinal herbs. The sixth and seventh floors are for finished medicines. The Yama Lord spoke in a low voice as he walked. He brought Fengjiu to a room inside and said, "This lord had people kidnap you because I want to use your talent in refining medicine to research a medicine that can suppress the cold poison. As long as you can develop it, this lord can guarantee your safe return." Cold poison. Hearing this, she was a little surprised. She thought of the 1,000-year cold poison in Uncle Ling's body. But why did this Yama lord also want a medicine to cure the cold poison? That's right. Other than the pharmacists here who are researching the antidote for the cold poison, there are also some who are refining medicine for our Yama palace. As long as you work seriously, this lord will not mistreat anyone. But if you cause trouble here, this lord will not let you off easily. Fengjiu glanced at him and said, "This is not so easy to develop. There are many kinds of cold poison, and the symptoms are different. If you don't feel the pulse or check the body's condition, which pharmacist would dare to casually concoct medicine?" She spread out her hands, shook her head and sat down at the table. "If I don't feel the pulse or see the body, I can't concoct the medicine." The Yama lord stared at him for a long time in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. He stood up and said, "Then you should first familiarize yourself with this place. When the quality of your medicine is higher than the pharmacists in the medicine hall, we'll talk about this." Seeing that he was about to leave, Fengjiu quickly reached out and grabbed his sleeve, shouting, "Wait." The Yama lord frowned and turned around. His gaze fell on the fair little hand that grabbed his sleeve. His eyes flashed and he coldly shouted, "Let go." With a flick of his sleeve, he flicked his hand away and pulled back his sleeve. Fengjiu did not care and said, "Yama lord, you guys captured me, but you didn't even prepare a place for me to sleep. You want me to squeeze in with others, don't you feel embarrassed? Also, my Xian energy has also been sealed by you. Your security here is so tight, are you afraid that I will run away? You don't have to make it so that I can't even leave the courtyard all day, right?" She glanced at him. Seeing that he didn't leave, she continued, "Since you invited me here to concoct the medicine, you should treat me like a VIP. Go and ask around, those people in the black market treat me like a grandfather. Tell me, compared to others, isn't your hospitality a little too poor?" Elder Lin and Grey Wolf couldn't help but glance at him when they saw that he wasn't afraid of death and was talking about hospitality to the king of hell. They felt that he was indulging in fantasy. After all, he was a prisoner. How could he talk about hospitality? However, what surprised them the most was that the Yama master's tolerance towards this brat had exceeded their expectations time and time again. The Yama king swept a glance at the young man's angry face and instructed, "Grey Wolf, arrange a small independent courtyard for him later. He will be free to move about in the Yama palace." "Yes." Hui Lang glanced at Fengjiu. He did not understand why his master treated him so well. Seeing his master walk out, Hui Lang called out and said softly, "Master, you go back first. I am not feeling well. I will find a doctor in the building." The Yama lord glanced back at him and replied, "Okay." Pfft. Fengjiu could not help but laugh. Looking at the anxious Hui Lang, he shook his head and looked at him mockingly. Chapter 185. As soon as he said that, the Yama lord, who was walking out in front, stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glanced at Hui Lang, who was staring at him with a murderous look in his eyes. His deep gaze met the youth's sly and smiling gaze. Erectile dysfunction. The low and magnetic voice once again landed on Hui Lang's body. His gaze swept down from his angry and embarrassed face and stopped at a certain place below his waist. The corner of his mouth curled into an imperceptible smile. Needless to say, it must be the youth's masterpiece. So it was erectile dysfunction. No wonder Hui Lang had become so haggard and anxious in the past 2 days. "It's you. It's you, isn't it?" Hui Lang glared at Fengjiu. He clenched his fists tightly and released a murderous aura. Unfortunately, Fengjiu was not afraid of his murderous gaze at all. Instead, she raised her chin and glanced at him. "What do you mean it's me? What does your erectile dysfunction have to do with me? Don't forget, I'm the famous ghost doctor. If I can't even see this problem of yours, it'll be too much of a disgrace to my reputation." Hearing that, Hui Lang suppressed a bellyful of anger. Looking at the strange gazes from the surrounding people, he only felt that he had lost all face, but he couldn't do anything to that person. Cough. The Yama Lord coughed and said, "Since your erectile dysfunction, you have to be treated. There are many doctors and pharmacists in the building. Let them take a look." As he spoke, he walked out. Fengjiu glanced at Hui Lang with a smile and followed him out. When she arrived outside, she saw the Yama Lord standing outside the courtyard. Thus, she walked up and asked with a smile, "Yama Lord, you weren't waiting for me, were you?" He turned around and looked at the youth who only reached his chest. He said in a low voice, "This is the Hall of Hell. Don't forget your status. Don't go overboard. Otherwise, this lord will take care of it for you." Fengjiu pursed his lips as he watched him leave after giving him a warning. In the end, couldn't he just say that he was being protective? However, she also found it strange. No matter how she looked at it, this Yama Lord did not seem to be a good-tempered person who was easy to get along with, so why would he always give in to her? Let her mess around. In fact, what she didn't know was that because the Yama Lord had interacted with her as Uncle Ling, in his eyes, Fengjiu was just a crafty and eccentric young man. However, this young man was a little too familiar with him. The way he called him Uncle Ling made him wonder if he was too old. But it was undeniable that he had no malice towards this young man. With the Yama Lord's instructions, Fengjiu could freely walk around the Hall of Hell as long as it was not a forbidden area. Thus, in less than half a day, she had thoroughly explored the inside and outside of the Hall of Hell. Among them, there were many places that were set up with formations. She did not set foot in them. However, she found a good place. There was a hot spring at the back of the mountain. It was said that it was the Yama Lord's private territory. Outsiders were not allowed to enter. She only took a look outside and left because there was also a formation set up there. After walking around, she returned to the medicine tower again. She walked around the third and fourth floor where medicinal herbs were stored. Suddenly, she couldn't move her feet away. She couldn't find all the spiritual herbs that she had asked the black market to help her find. However, she didn't expect that this medicine house had everything. At that moment, she excitedly picked up some spiritual herbs and planned to concoct some scar-removing ointment. Chapter 186. Hearing this, Fengjiu looked at Elder Lin with a serious face and said, "Of course these are for medicine. The Yama Lord said that he wants to concoct an antidote for cold poison, so I have to bring these back to study them." Hearing this, Elder Lin was a little confused, but these medicines aren't suitable as antidotes for cold poison. Elder Lin, you don't understand, do you? Every medicine has a counteracting effect. Although I haven't been able to concoct the antidote yet, I won't go wrong if I bring it back to study. She spoke with a serious face and a righteous attitude, scaring Elder Lin. Then, do you need anything else? There are medicinal tools in the medicine building. If you need anything, come find me. Hearing this, she smiled and narrowed her eyes. Elder Lin, you're such a good person. Don't worry, I'll come back again if I don't have enough medicine. I'll definitely look for you if I need any medicinal tools. Let's go. Take me to pick some for me to use. She patted Elder Lin's shoulder in a brotherly manner and went downstairs with him. That night, Fengjiu was in her small courtyard making the scar-removing ointment. On the other side, in the main courtyard, Elder Lin was reporting to the Yama Lord about the medicines that Fengjiu had taken from the medicine building today. Before he finished, he said, "It's just that I find it strange. Those medicines aren't for cold poison, but that Gui Gui said that they can be used." Gui Gui. The Yama Lord glanced at Elder Lin and raised his voice slightly. Elder Lin was stunned and thought to himself, why doesn't Master get the main point? He was reporting that those precious medicines had been taken by a young man, but his master didn't say anything for a long time. Instead, he reacted when he heard the young man's name. At that moment, he didn't dare to think any further and could only respectfully say, "Yes, that young man said that you can just call him Goe Goe. You're dismissed." The Yama Lord waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. "Master, those medicines. Give them to him if he wants them." "Yes." Hearing this, old Lin didn't say anything else. He bowed and left. After sitting for a while and drinking 2 cups of wine, he stood up and walked out. Originally, he was taking a stroll outside, but unknowingly, he had walked to the outside of the young man's courtyard. Seeing that the light in the room was still on, and the reflection of the figure on the window paper was moving back and forth, he was moved and walked in. In the room, Fengjiu was happily humming a tune as she applied the newly developed ointment to her face in front of the mirror. Thinking that it wouldn't take long for her beauty to recover, her depressed mood from being caught and brought here finally eased. "You took my medicine just to make this damn thing? Wow!" Suddenly, a voice came from behind her, giving her a fright. She instinctively jumped up and turned around, only to see King Yen, who had entered at some point in time, standing there with his hands behind his back, looking at her with interest. "You can even scare someone like this? You must have done too many bad things." He raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man with the ointment on his face. Seeing that it was him, Fengjiu sighed and patted her chest. She said unhappily, "Yama Lord, what are you doing here in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? You can come here if you want. But what are you trying to do by silently floating in like a ghost? You can't scare people like this, right?" Chapter 187. What's wrong? Why are you staring at me like that? She asked in confusion. At this moment, the Yama Lord's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the face covered in black and green ointment and saw those clever and cunning eyes. He suddenly understood. So it was her. It was that little girl in the Jufulan forest. It was the little girl who hugged his leg and called him brother-in-law and uncle. Moreover, she was the one who saved him when he was being hunted down by the cold poison. Thinking of this, a complicated look flashed across his eyes. He didn't expect to meet her again after so many twists and turns. Moreover, she had disguised herself as a man and fooled him. If he hadn't seen her face covered in black and green ointment and those eyes, he wouldn't have recognized her. Fengjiu, who felt uncomfortable under his gaze, frowned and said, "Yama Lord, it's so late. Why aren't you going back to sleep? Are you planning to stare at me here?" The Yama Lord's deep gaze swept past her chest, which was only wearing an inner garment. He saw that it was flat, without any rise or fall. However, in his mind, he inexplicably thought of the soft touch he had accidentally touched in the Jufulan forest. For a moment, his ears turned slightly red. He immediately turned and strode out. "That's ridiculous." Fengjiu saw him leave without saying anything. She only felt that this Yama Lord's temper was simply too strange. She followed, locked the door, and returned to the mirror to apply another layer of ointment. Then, she went to sleep with her ointment-smeared face. The next day, when Fengjiu came to the medicine house with her ointment-smeared face, Elder Lin couldn't help but welcome her in surprise. "Goe Goe, what's on your face? Why didn't you wash your face before leaving?" "It's ointment. I can't wash it off." She grinned and said, "Elder Lin, I'm going to the 4th floor to pick medicine. Do you want to come with me?" "Picking medicine again? The ones you took away yesterday." "Yesterday's concoction failed. Look, in order not to waste it, I put it all on my face." She pointed at the ointment on her face and smiled. This. Elder Lin was speechless. He really didn't know what to say. However, when he thought of the Yama Lord's attitude towards him and the Yama Lord's instructions, he couldn't help but sigh and say, "If you want to get the medicine, go get it yourself. I'll go back and register it. I still have things to do, so I won't follow you up." Fengjiu's eyes lit up. "Elder Lin, I didn't expect you to trust me so much. Aren't you afraid that I'll ruin those precious herbs? Elder Lin thought to himself, it's not that I trust you. It's just that the Yama Lord told you to take as much as you want. Only the Yama Lord would let you squander like this. Her gaze fell on his face. Thinking about how all the precious spiritual herbs he took yesterday had become ointment on his face, she suddenly felt her heart ache. What a wastrel! What a wastrel! Shaking his head, he went to do his own thing. Thus, Fengjiu went upstairs and took a lot of spiritual herbs back. He locked himself in his room and fiddled with them non-stop. In the evening, Hui Lang came looking for him with an ugly expression. On the other side, in the main courtyard, the Yama Lord held a cup of tea in his hand. His posture hadn't changed at all. No one knew what he was thinking. Sometimes he frowned, and sometimes he curled his lips into a faint smile. That strange appearance made the black-clothed cultivator beside him feel nervous. After taking a sip of the tea, he realized that it was cold. He put down the cup in his hand and asked, "Ing Yi, where did Hui Lang go?" "Master, Hui Lang went to see the ghost doctor." Chapter 188. On the other side, Fengjiu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw Hui Lang standing by the door with an ugly expression. He crossed his arms and asked with his chin raised, "What's the matter?" "I'm here to treat your illness." He resisted the urge to kill and tried to speak in a calm voice. However, that stiff voice and that baleful aura still revealed the true feelings in his heart. "Although I'm the ghost doctor, I can't treat just anyone's illness," she said casually with an infuriating smile on her face. "Moreover, aren't you very powerful? Why would you need me to treat your illness?" Hui Lang ground his teeth and stared at the infuriating youth in front of him. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have become like this." "Hey! Stop, stop!" She glanced at him and said, "Don't talk nonsense. You wanted to become Uncle Rabbit, and you're blaming me for it? That's unreasonable." As she spoke, the corners of her lips curled. She looked him up and down and smiled wickedly. "Actually, I think you're doing quite well now. Since you can't get hard, why don't you just obediently be the lower one? Why waste your energy to treat your illness? You." Hui Lang was extremely embarrassed by her explicit words, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only grit his teeth and ask, "What do you want in order to treat me?" She looked at the red-eyed Hui Lang and said with an evil expression, "Men can't always be hard. It's healthy to be soft, understand?" Seeing his face turn red from holding his breath, she touched her chin and said with a look of realization, "I know. No problem. Leave your illness to me. I'll make sure you're satisfied. However, shouldn't we talk about the payment?" Seeing that she had relented, Hui Lang secretly sighed in relief and asked, "What do you want?" "I heard from Elder Lin that you once received 2 top-grade pearls the size of eggs. Master gave them to me." He glared. Those were his treasures. Hearing this, she raised her eyebrows. "So you want to immortalize them?" As soon as she said this, Hui Lang was immediately discouraged. He glared at the hateful youth in front of him and took out 2 top-grade pearls the size of eggs from the space ring on his finger and handed them to him. "Take them." Weighing the 2 ultra-quality pearls in her hand, she narrowed her eyes with a smile and walked inside, saying, "Come in. Take off your shirt and sit on the chair." Grey Wolf was not pretentious. After entering, he took off his coat and sat down on a chair. "TSK, I couldn't tell. Her figure is not bad." Her gaze swept past the well-defined muscles on his body and went to his back. She took out a few silver needles and inserted them into the acupuncture points on his waist. "Done. That's it." He was a little dumbfounded. He had only been stabbed twice, and he was already fine. "What? You don't believe me?" She glanced at him and grinned. There's no need to rush. You can go back. I promise you'll see the effect tomorrow morning. At this time, Hui Lang didn't see the sly and evil smile on her face. Otherwise, he wouldn't have believed her so easily. Just as Grey Wolf doubtfully put on his shirt and tied his belt, a figure suddenly walked in. That sharp and intimidating gaze fell on him like ice, causing him to feel as if his entire body was frozen, not daring to move an inch. Even his voice had a trace of panic and trembling because of the other party's cold and intimidating pressure. Chapter 189. The Yama Lord's sharp and cold eyes fell on Hui Lang's hands, which were tied with the belt. His eyes were like cold knives, which made people feel cold. Did you cure him? His deep black eyes fell on Fengjiu, and his voice was low and steady, which made people unable to guess what he was thinking. Fengjiu blinked and nodded, yes. He looked at him strangely, feeling that these two people were a little crazy. Took off your clothes. His gaze once again landed on the stiff Grey Wolf. His voice was already faintly tinged with a dangerous aura. Yes, I took off my clothes. Fengjiu nodded obediently again. How could he do the acupuncture without taking off his clothes? Of course he had to take off his clothes. So, you also saw it? His voice was like an ice drop, which made Hui Lang break out in a cold sweat. He thought to himself, did I do something to make my master unhappy? Or did I violate some taboos? Of course, how could I do the acupuncture without seeing it? She also felt a little strange, especially when she felt the temperature of the whole room drop suddenly, as if there was a cold air whistling around her, which was very strange. An unknown flame rose in the Yama master's heart when he saw the confused look on her face. He took a deep look at her before he brushed his robes and turned around to leave. At the same time, his low and deep voice was filled with a cold and dangerous aura as it rang out in a furious manner. Ing Yi, throw Hui Lang to the Cool Breeze gang for me. Ing Yi, who was chasing after them, was stunned when he heard this. The Cool Breeze gang. He looked inside and saw Hui Lang, who was also stunned, standing there stiffly, with a look of disbelief on his face. Fengjiu was stunned for a moment. He looked at the two of them and saw the look of disbelief on their faces. He couldn't help but blink and asked curiously, what is the Cool Breeze gang? Unexpectedly, it would have been better if she hadn't asked. Once she did, Grey Wolf broke down and rushed out. Master! Master, I don't want to go to the Cool Breeze gang. Master! Seeing Hui Lang rushing out, Ing Yi came to his senses and hurriedly chased after him. If he didn't carry out his master's order, not only would Hui Lang be thrown to the Cool Breeze gang, but he would also be implicated. Therefore, it was better to have one dead than two dead. He could only let Hui Lang down. Fengjiu stood at the door, listening to Hui Lang's ghost-like wails and wolf-like howls. He couldn't help but frown, thinking to himself, what kind of place is the Cool Breeze gang? It actually made Hui Lang's expression change. But why did the Yama Lord come? And why did you leave in a fit of anger? She muttered to herself. Since she couldn't figure it out, she decided not to think about it anymore. She returned to her room and closed the door, continuing her unfinished business. The next day, when she gave the 4th grade medicine to Elder Lin, she looked at his surprised and excited expression and couldn't help but giggle. Elder Lin, let me ask you something. Haha, what is it? Tell me. Elder Lin put away the medicine like it was a treasure and planned to show it to his master later. What is the Cool Breeze gang? She took a piece of cake from his table and ate it. The Cool Breeze gang is a small brothel. Why do you ask? He stayed in the medicine building all day yesterday, so he didn't know that Hui Lang was thrown to the Cool Breeze gang by the Yama Lord's order. Ahem. What? Small brothel. Chapter 190. Seeing Feng Jiu laughing so happily, Elder Lin shook his head and said, Go upstairs and get whatever medicine you want. I'll bring the medicine to master first. With that, he walked out, leaving Feng Jiu alone in the room, laughing happily. Elder Lin came to the main courtyard and saw that Hui Lang, who was always by his master's side, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Ying Yi was guarding his master's courtyard. Elder Lin asked, Ying Yi, why haven't I seen Hui Lang today? Hearing this, Ying Yi's mouth twitched. He looked inside and said in a low voice, Hui Lang is receiving guests in the Qingfeng gang. What? Elder Lin was startled and shouted, the Qingfeng gang is receiving guests. Did he hear wrongly? Ying Yi made a shushing gesture and pointed inside, telling him not to speak too loudly. Elder Lin wiped his cold sweat and said, I have something to discuss with my master. I'll go in first. In front of the desk, the Yama Lord was reading the news from all over the world. At this time, there was a knock on the door and Elder Lin's voice came from outside. Master, I have something to report. Come in. Elder Lin took a deep breath and walked in. When he saw the black figure busying himself in front of the desk, he walked forward and respectfully bowed before presenting the medicine. Master, this is the medicine that Gui Gui has just made. I've seen it and it's a 4th grade medicine. Hearing this, the Yama Lord put down the information in his hand and looked up. She made a 4th grade medicine? Yes, and it's a 4th grade medicine. Even in our medicine hall, there hasn't been a 4th grade medicine. Speaking of this, Elder Lin was a little excited. He didn't expect that Gui Gui, an ordinary-looking young man, to be so capable. No wonder his master treated him differently. The Yama Lord pondered for a while and said, later, ask her to brand her subordinate's mark on the bottle. Then, send the medicine to the auction house and let them sell it as the famous medicine of the ghost doctor. Hearing this, Elder Lin was startled. Master, you want to make the ghost doctor famous? If someone from Yanjian handled the treatment, the name of the ghost doctor would spread throughout the entire Qingtang kingdom in less than 3 months. Go and do it. He didn't say much and just waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. Yes. Elder Lin bowed and retreated. On the other side, in the cool breeze inn, Hui Lang, who was hiding in the room, glanced at his lower body, gnashed his teeth and cursed, you bastard. I knew that he wouldn't treat me so easily. As expected, he's up to no good. At this moment, the door was pushed open and a fair and delicate man walked in. He glanced at Hui Lang's erect part and couldn't help but reveal a mischievous smile. Hui Lang, why are you so conflicted? It's hard for others to keep the golden spear intact, but you're different. Look, how long has it been? And he's still so strong. His endurance really leaves us in the dust. Hui Lang glared at him and said, you're still laughing. Why don't you help me think of a way? Aren't we brothers? It's not like there's no way. The man walked over with a smile and said, you know what kind of place this is. We don't lack prostitutes. Why don't I find you a couple to relieve your lust? Stop fooling around. I'm so annoyed. He said unhappily. All right then. The man clapped his hands. Then, a few prostitutes came in with an almost transparent red silk robe and rouge. Chapter 191. The man laughed maliciously, of course I'm carrying out my master's orders. Do you really think that I'll let you hide in your room forever? Hey hey. Ren Xiang, don't go too far. I'm only carrying out my master's orders, I won't go too far. Don't worry, I'll take care of you and won't let you lose your virginity. He smiled and waved his hand, indicating for the servants to come forward and change his clothes. I'll change it myself. I don't need them. Hui Lang shouted, but when he picked up the thin red clothes, his face was as black as a casserole. You want me to wear this? This is clearly transparent. Ren Xiang glanced at him and laughed, you can also choose to go out naked. I believe that with you as the star, business will be booming these few days. Just like that, Fire Wolf was forced to change into the translucent red clothes, put on some makeup, and sent to the stage. On the other side, Fengjiu, who had heard that Yama Lord had gone out, slipped into the hot spring at the back of the mountain to take a bath. To her, the hot spring at the back of the mountain was safer than her courtyard. People could enter her courtyard whenever they wanted, and they didn't even knock on the door. She was always on tenterhooks when she took a bath, so how could it compare to the comfortable hot spring where no one dared to barge in? After soaking in the hot spring for more than an hour, she put on her clothes and took out an ointment from her space to apply on her face. During this period of time, her face was covered with ointment no matter if it was day or night. She had seen that the scar on her face had faded a lot, and it would probably disappear completely after a while. After applying the ointment, she quietly left the hot spring at the back of the mountain and returned to her courtyard. When she returned to her room, she locked all the windows and doors, blew out the lights, and entered the space to cultivate her spiritual energy. During this period of time, she didn't have much opportunity to cultivate here. After all, if she wasn't careful, she could be discovered at any time that she had a space treasure and spiritual energy. After entering the space, she looked at the sleeping fire phoenix. Seeing that it showed no signs of waking up, she sat down cross-legged and silently chanted the Qi condensation manual to cultivate, until the second half of the night. The commotion outside woke her up in the space. She quickly flashed out of the space and appeared on the bed. She heard the room door suddenly being pushed open. "Goe goe. Hurry up and come with me." Elder Lin anxiously went forward to pull her away. "Elder Lin?" Feng Jiu looked at him in astonishment and asked, "What's wrong? Where are you going in the middle of the night?" Yama Lord went to the Poison Valley to steal the Heaven's Heart Flame Lotus. "Hurry, come with me." Because he knew that his master's medical skills were exceptional, when he found out that his master was injured, he immediately rushed over and pulled him along. Hearing this, Feng Jiu's hearts. "How did you get hurt?" Although he said that, he still picked up the coat by the bed and put it on before following Elder Lin out. "How would you know what kind of place the Poison Valley is? It's filled with poisonous creatures. Moreover, the master of the Poison Valley is a nascent soul cultivator, and he's an expert in poisons. No matter how strong master is, it's inevitable that he'll be injured." Feng Jiu followed Elder Lin to the main courtyard, which belonged to Yama Lord. This was her first time here. Elder Lin brought Feng Jiu into the room and asked worriedly, "Yi? How's master? Where is he injured? Is it serious?" Yama Lord, who was lying on the bed naked and letting Yi treat his wound, turned his head and saw a figure following Elder Lin in. He immediately pulled up the blanket and covered himself with it. At the same time, his low and cold voice carried a trace of imperceptible embarrassment and anger. Chapter 192. Before Feng Jiu could see what was going on, she felt a strong gust of wind and was pushed out. She was not the only one who was stunned. Yi and Elder Lin, who were treating his wound, were also stunned. "Master? Let her out," the Yama Lord said calmly. Yi saw this and quickly walked out. He said to the stunned Feng Jiu, "You go out first." Feng Jiu poked her head out and was about to take a peek inside to see what was going on when she heard his voice again. "Yi, throw her out." Seeing this, Feng Jiu immediately slipped out. She muttered unhappily, "I didn't ask for it. What's the point of drinking? It's simply baffling." Elder Lin hurriedly walked inside and asked, "Where is master hurt?" The back of his thigh was bitten by a poisonous snake. "I've already treated the wound and forced the poison out. Master has also taken a detoxification pill. It should be fine. But his arm was cut. He probably won't be able to move much for a few days." Yi looked at the Yama Lord and said, "Master, the wound hasn't been treated yet. Hearing this, the Yama lord lifted the blanket and revealed the wound on the back of his thigh near his buttocks. Because it was a poisonous snake bite, Yi made a small cross-shaped incision on the wound and let him use his chi to force the poison out. He was about to apply the medicine when they barged in. But, they were all men. Why did Master chase the ghost doctor out? He had doubts in his heart, but he didn't dare to ask. He retreated to the side and let Elder Lin take over. After applying medicine, he bandaged the wound. Only then did he put on his pants, tie his belt, and treat the wound on his arm. Outside the courtyard, Fengjiu sat in the courtyard and looked at the stars. She wondered how Ling Xuan was doing. He didn't know where she was. He must be worried to death. Thinking of this, she felt that it was time for her to sneak away. However, even though he had been here for a few days, he still couldn't figure out who this Yama Lord was. The skyheart flaming lotus that he stole from the Poison Valley tonight was one of the most precious herbs needed to treat the 1000-year frost poison. 1000-year frost poison. The master of Yen Hull. There was also that bearded uncle. Could there be a connection between the three of them? Just as he was deep in thought, he heard Elder Lin's voice. Gui, you're still here. Go back to sleep. Master is fine. He said apologetically. He thought it was a serious injury, so he dragged him along when he came over. He didn't expect that he would be chased out by his master. Elder Lin, the skyheart flaming lotus is an essential spirit herb to cure the 1000-year frost poison. The Yama Lord spent so much effort to steal it from the Poison Valley. Who is this person to the Yama Lord? This. You'll know in the future. Elder Lin chuckled and said, it's late. If you don't go back to sleep, I'll go back to sleep. I'm old and can't compare to you young people. As he said this, he waved his hand and walked out. Seeing this, Fengjiu also stood up and prepared to go back to the courtyard to sleep. Unexpectedly, Yi's voice came from behind. Ghost Doctor, Master wants you to stay on night watch. Hearing this, she turned back in shock. Night watch. Why should I? Yi glanced at her and said, Master's orders don't have so many whys. Master's hands and legs are inconvenient. Do whatever he wants you to do. Chapter 193. Come in. Hearing the voice coming from the room, she gritted her teeth and walked in. When she entered the room, she saw the Yama Lord half lying on the bed. She asked, what's the matter? The Yama Lord glanced at her. She didn't know what he was thinking. After a while, he said, help me change into a clean set of clothes. Why didn't you ask Yi to help you change? She instinctively blurted out the words and met his cold gaze. Seeing this, she cowered and asked, where are the clothes? In the wardrobe. His gaze fell on her body. He watched as she opened the wardrobe and messed up the clothes inside. Only then did she take out a white undershirt and a black jacket. Coming to the bedside, Fengjiu stared at him on the bed and suddenly smiled. Do you need me to help you take off your clothes? Take it off. He stared at her, trying to see if there was any shyness on her face. However, he was disappointed. He only saw her eyes light up because of his words. She stared at his body like a wolf. That gaze was just like a lecherous woman. Looking at her like this, he really couldn't imagine what kind of family could raise such a strange girl. Another thing that surprised him was that he didn't know when he had gotten used to her touch, but he didn't feel disgusted like other women when they touched him. He attributed this strange feeling to mistaking her for a young man. That was why he accepted her from the bottom of his heart. Hearing his words, Fengjiu was a little excited. She grinned and put the clothes on the bed. She swallowed her saliva and said excitedly, then, I'll take them off. Helping me change my clothes can make you this excited? What are you so excited about? He asked with amusement. He felt that her thoughts were really strange. Didn't I say it before? I like handsome men the most, especially men like Yama Lord. It's rare to have a chance to help Yama Lord change his clothes. How can I not be excited? She smiled and her eyes narrowed. Her hands had already unbuttoned his shirt. His clothes were half open, revealing his sexy chest. She swallowed her saliva. Fuck. How could anyone live with such a figure? The beautiful man on the bed was leaning against the bed with his clothes half undone. His chest was half hidden and half visible in front of her eyes. She couldn't see his face clearly because of the half mask he was wearing, but his deep and seductive eyes were as seductive as a fairy's. His sexy thin lips were slightly raised for some reason, and the corners of his lips were slightly curved. His masculine charm made her almost unable to resist pouncing on him. This was a blatant temptation to commit a crime. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party was too strong, tsk, she really wanted to pounce on him. At this time, the Yama Lord's heart was rippling because of her words, I like handsome men the most, especially men like you, the Yama Lord. It could be said that this was the first time that such a strange feeling had surfaced in his heart. There was some joy, some pleasure, and he didn't even realize that the corners of his lips had curled up because of the pleasure. Looking at her swallowing her saliva because of his figure, her eyes shining, he felt a strange sense of pride and satisfaction. Thinking of this strange feeling, his eyes flashed with a trace of discomfort. He coughed lightly and said in a low voice, "Don't dawdle. Hurry up." Okay. She narrowed her eyes with a smile and quickly took off his shirt. Her hand had just touched his belt when he grabbed it. Chapter 194. Aren't you going to change your pants? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. His face darkened when he heard this and saw the light in her eyes. I'll just change my shirt. Oh, she replied regretfully. She glanced at the belt. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. The Yama Lord's mouth twitched when he saw the expression on her face. He couldn't bear to look at her any more and looked away. After changing his blood-stained shirt, the Yama Lord lay down to rest and ordered, "Go sleep in the outer room. I'll call you if there's anything." Fengjiu glanced at him and asked, "Aren't you going to take off your mask?" This person seemed to be wearing a mask all the time, even when he was sleeping. It was as if he didn't want her to recognize him. Could it be someone she knew? Get out. The Yama Lord glanced at her and said coldly. Fengjiu shrugged when he saw this, and he didn't say anything further. He walked to the soft couch in the outer room and lay down. He was unable to sleep with his eyes closed, and he was thinking in his heart. How should I escape? Should she take some spiritual medicine with her before she escaped? The next morning, the Yama Lord woke up and walked out of the outer room. He saw the figure curled up on the soft couch. The black and green ointment on her face seemed to have dried after a night. The surface was slightly cracked, but she was still sleeping like a pig and snoring. He lifted his leg and kicked her leg, but she retracted her leg and murmured, "Go play somewhere else. Don't disturb me." He raised his eyebrows and his deep eyes flashed. He looked at her deeply and walked out. When he reached the courtyard, he ordered the guards to get water for him to wash up. When it was about 7 in the morning, Fengjiu turned over, but she forgot that she was sleeping on a soft bed. As soon as she turned around, she fell to the ground with a bang. The sound was so loud that even Yen Zhu, who was eating breakfast outside, heard it. Hiss. She took a deep breath, rubbed her sore arm, and stood up. Her whole person was awake. When she looked up, she saw Ing Yi standing at the door, staring at her with a curious expression. She immediately glared at him. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen people fall to the ground? Chi. Ing Yi sneered, nodded, and said, I've never seen anyone fall out of bed while sleeping. How deep are you sleeping? Fengjiu ignored him and touched the ointment on his face. It had already dried. He then said, "I'll take my leave first." Without waiting for him to speak, he quickly walked out. When he arrived outside the courtyard, he saw the Yama lord eating his breakfast. He stopped when he saw the exquisite food on the table and shouted to the guards outside, "Bring me more bowls and chopsticks." After rinsing his mouth, he came to the table and sat down. "I think you don't mind me eating with you." She took the bowl and chopsticks from the guard and took a bite of a green dumpling. Her eyes lit up and she said vaguely, It's even wrapped in gravy. It smells so good." Looking at her greedy face, as if she hadn't eaten for hundreds of years, the Yama lord slowed down his eating speed and ordered, "Get someone to bring me more." Hearing that casual voice, Yi raised his head in astonishment. Seeing that his master didn't dislike the young man's face that was smeared with ointment, and even asked him to serve another portion, he couldn't help but have more thoughts in his heart. Chapter 195. Why are you still in a daze? Hearing his master's faintly displeased voice, he hurriedly returned to his senses and glanced at the youth who was eating happily. He hurriedly responded, "Yes." He walked out and told the guards outside to go to the kitchen and ask them to send more. Her eyes lit up when she saw the few plates of piping hot desserts and dishes served on the table, and she hurriedly picked up some for Yen Luo as a show of hospitality. "Yama lord, eat this." Then, without caring whether he ate or not, she helped him with the chopsticks and began to eat her own. Seeing her helping his master with the chopsticks, Yi, who was waiting at the side, glared at her, "You should eat your own food, why are you helping your master? Master doesn't eat." Before he could say the word, someone else picked up the food. He saw his noble and domineering master stare at the food in the bowl for a while, then pick up the food and eat it. This made him feel suffocated in his heart, neither up nor down, and it was very uncomfortable. When Fengjiu saw him eat, she smiled and narrowed her eyes, as if she was the master. She didn't forget who was the one who was eating in whose courtyard. After she picked up some food, she helped him with some. "Yama lord, try this, you haven't eaten yet." She picked up the last piece of dessert from a small plate and gave it to him. There were 4 pieces in each small plate, but she only gave the last piece to him after eating 3 of them. This eagerness made the king of hell raise his eyebrows. Yi at the side was about to cry. He wanted to shout, "Master, can't you be a little more reserved? Why didn't you refuse? That young man ate whatever he picked up. The other party is a man, where is your integrity?" Fengjiu felt happy after eating breakfast. She touched her round belly, burped and stood up, "I have to go back, I'm so full." Looking at the girl who left after finishing her breakfast, Lord Yen glanced at the empty plates on the table and asked, "Don't you usually provide her with her meals?" Yi lowered his head and replied, "Yes, but the food that others eat is definitely not as good as master's." Her master's meals were all personally prepared by a first-class chef. Every dish was exquisite and delicious. Naturally, other people's meals couldn't compare to it. Hearing this, the Yama lord nodded, stood up, and walked out. When Yi saw this, he followed him out of the courtyard and ordered the guards outside, "Let people clean up the table." Then he quickly followed his master in front. After returning to the courtyard, Fengjiu washed off the dried ointment on his face. Seeing that the scars on his face were fading day by day, he could not help but smile happily. This is the biggest benefit of coming here. She applied some more ointment on her face and walked out with a face covered with ointment. She wanted to walk to digest the food, but when she came to the rockery, she saw a black figure standing by the pond with his hands behind his back. She saw the black figure standing with his hands behind his back. Half of his face was handsome and resolute, and the silver half of his mask reflected a dazzling light under the sunlight. She shook her head inwardly and cursed, "Evildoer." She wanted to turn around and walk away, but she didn't expect to eat breakfast at his place this morning. After thinking about it, she walked over. "Yama lord, you." Ah! As soon as she spoke, her foot slipped and her whole body fell forward. Ing Yi, who was standing not far away, saw her slip and her whole body fell forward. Seeing that she was about to fall into the pond, he secretly laughed. This kid, he deserved it. Chapter 196. When the Yama Lord heard her voice, he turned around to look at her. When he saw her slip on a pebble and fall towards the edge of the pool, he almost instinctively rushed forward to catch her. But the moment she fell into his arms, he was stunned. The young girl's petite body crashed into his arms, her soft body pressed against his firm and strong chest. The faint scent of medicine that belonged to her body wafted into his nose, stirring up a slight ripple in his heart. That pair of white hands tightly grasped the front of his clothes, her small face buried in his chest, only her glossy and soft black hair could be seen. The person in his arms raised her head in astonishment, meeting his deep gaze. At such a close distance, when their eyes met, an indescribable feeling quietly spread in his heart. And when the two of them fell into the eyes of Ing Yi, who was not far away, the two of them were looking at each other affectionately, causing him to be in a mess. Wasn't that right? Those were two grown men. Even if the young man was a little petite, the fact that he was a man could not be ignored. But now, Master was actually holding the young man's waist without letting go, and the two of them were so close that their eyes were looking at each other. That scene made him instinctively look around. He thought to himself, I can't let anyone else see this. Otherwise, my master's reputation will be completely ruined. Fengjiu looked in astonishment at the Yama Lord who had one hand around her waist. Her mind did not have the messy and indescribable feelings of the Yama Lord. She only thought, I'm a man now, is it really appropriate for him to hold a man like this? Being stared at like this by his deep gaze, she could not help but shiver, goosebumps rising all over her body, and quickly retreated. Sorry, my foot slipped. As she spoke, she retreated and smiled embarrassedly. I just came to say hello, you can continue. Looking at the woman who ran away like she was running for her life, the Yama Lord lowered his head and looked at his hand, as if he was thinking about something. Seeing this, Ing Yi finally could not help but say something. Master, there are a few extremely beautiful women who have come to the beauty pavilion in the past 2 days. The Yama Lord looked at him. And then this subordinate thought, Master, do you need them to come over at night to serve you? After saying this, Ing Yi only saw his master sweeping a cold gaze at him, which made his scalp tingle and he almost couldn't help but kneel down. On the other side, Fengjiu rubbed his arms as he walked and muttered, could this Yama Lord really be gay? But even if he's gay, he shouldn't be interested in me, right? No matter what, my face is already ruined. How could he be interested in a face covered in black and blue ointment? I don't think so. I must be thinking too much. She gently exhaled and calmed herself down. Seeing that the medicine pavilion was just in front, she strode in and greeted Elder Lin, who was checking the herbs in the courtyard. Elder Lin. It's Gongui. Elder Lin turned to look at her, then suddenly looked left and right. He came to her side and asked, I heard that Master asked you to keep watch last night. Aha, she nodded. Why would Master ask you to keep watch? What did he ask you to do? Elder Lin's tone was strange, and he looked at her with a puzzled gaze. Chapter 197. Nothing much. I just helped him change his clothes and then went to sleep. She said helplessly. She was a man now, okay? Being looked at like this and asked like this, did he really think that there was something unspeakable between her and his master? Sleep. Elder Lin exclaimed in shock. His voice was slightly raised because of the shock. Almost as soon as the voice came out, everyone in the courtyard looked at them. Why are you making a fuss? We're sleeping separately. She rolled her eyes speechlessly. Phew. You scared me to death. Elder Lin patted his chest and sighed softly, "Oh right, you can make a few more bottles of medicine in the next 2 days. Third-grade medicine is fine too. It's best if you can make 2 or 3 more bottles of fourth-grade medicine. The one from last time is fine too." Hearing this, she turned her eyes and said, "Okay, I'll go upstairs to get the medicine." As she spoke, she went into the building by herself. Based on his master's attitude towards him, he could take whatever medicine he wanted. He just had to register it afterwards. Therefore, Elder Lin did not follow. 2 days later, in the main courtyard. At the stone table in the courtyard, the Yama Lord supported his head with one hand and read a book with the other. His eyes did not leave the book. His expression, no matter how one looked at it, looked like he was in a trance. But, the corner of Ing Yi's mouth twitched slightly and he looked at the sky speechlessly. He had been standing here for nearly an hour, wondering if he should remind his master that he was holding the book upside down. But when he saw his master flipping to the next page after a while, he wondered if the book was meant to be read upside down. "Ing Yi." Hearing his master call him, Ing Yi immediately came back to his senses. He took a step forward and answered loudly, "This subordinate is here." The Yama Lord looked up from the book and looked at Ing Yi, who was standing upright with his chest puffed out, with a somewhat puzzled look, and asked, "What are you doing?" "This subordinate is waiting for master's orders." The Yama Lord looked him up and down, then pondered for a while and asked, "Tell me, if a person always inadvertently thinks of another person, why do you think it is?" "Because I want to kill him." Ing Yi answered without thinking. This was because when he kept thinking about someone, that person was definitely someone he wanted to kill. Hearing this, the Yama Lord glanced at him strangely. "If you don't want to kill her, but want to." He paused because it was difficult to express. "Don't want to kill him?" Ing Yi looked at him. Suddenly, as if he thought of something, he hesitated and said, "Master, if a man wants a woman, then he should have some thoughts about that woman, but..." "But what?" "However, if a man wants to be a man, then I'm afraid that he's gay." He spoke cautiously while paying attention to his master's expression. "You have thoughts about women?" The Yama Lord murmured in disbelief. Because he hated women to begin with, how could he have any thoughts about women? However, for the past 2 days, that person's figure and that pair of sly and smiling eyes kept appearing in his mind. There was also that strange feeling in his heart, which made him feel that he had to figure it out. "Tonight, go to the beauty pavilion and bring 2 women over." Chapter 198. Yama Lord glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Just go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Yes. "I'll go now." Ing Yi answered in surprise and hurried out. God had opened his eyes. His master was finally interested in women. He was so worried these 2 days. He was really afraid that his master would really become gay. Hui Lang, who had stayed in the Cool Breeze gang for several days, was coming back. Seeing Ing Yi grinning foolishly, he was a little surprised. He stopped him and asked, "What's wrong? Why are you so happy?" "Oh. You're back. Is the Cool Breeze gang comfortable?" Ing Yi asked jokingly. Hearing him mention it, Hui Lang's face darkened, "Don't mention the Cool Breeze gang to me." Then he glanced at him and asked, "You haven't told me yet. What makes you so happy?" Hey, let me tell you. My master asked me to go to the beauty restaurant and arrange 2 beauties to be sent there at night." He came forward and said with a happy face. "Women?" Hui Lang looked at him with astonishment. "My master asked you to arrange 2 women to serve him. Did I hear it wrong?" "It's true. I think my master is enlightened." Grey Wolf's face was full of disbelief as he asked, "Did anything special happen in the past few days when I was away? My master, did he get stimulated by something?" After all, their master couldn't even stand women getting close to him. How could he ask Yi to arrange two women? Could it be that his misogyny was cured? Let's talk about it later. I'll go to the beauty restaurant and tell them. He patted him on the shoulder and strode to the beauty restaurant. In his opinion, it was a big deal to choose two beauties to serve his master at night. He couldn't be careless. At night, Fengjiu went out for a walk after dinner. When she came to the pavilion, she saw Yi leading two beautiful and enchanting women to the rockery. She was curious and shouted. Yi. Yi heard the voice and looked over. Seeing the young man in red, he couldn't help but grin. It's the ghost doctor. What a coincidence. Fengjiu walked over and looked at the two beautiful women behind him. He asked, how can there be two such beautiful women? Could she be one of the beauties in the beauty pavilion? As far as she knew, there were only beauties in the beauty pavilion in this Yama tower. The other places, even the main courtyard of the Yama Lord's courtyard, were all served by shadow guards. It was rare to see such a woman walking around. As expected of the ghost doctor, you guessed it right. Yi seemed to want to explain. After looking at the two beautiful women behind him, he said to Fengjiu, these two are the new beauties of Beauty House. Master ordered me to bring them over to serve him. Serve in bed. Fengjiu widened his eyes in astonishment and said with a strange expression, two at once. Can your master take it? Hearing this, Yi was displeased, and his face darkened. What do you mean by that? Look at my master's strong and healthy body. Do you think he's a useless man? Hearing this, Fengjiu's mouth twitched. He was speechless for a while. I won't disturb the ghost doctor's stroll. Yi said and led them to the main courtyard. Seeing this, Fengjiu's eyes moved slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a wicked smile. He immediately followed. Chapter 199. In the main courtyard, the Yama Lord, who had just finished bathing, walked out with water droplets on his hair. He sat down at the table and poured himself a glass of water. Just then, he heard Yi's voice from outside. Master. Come in. A deep and magnetic voice came from inside. Yi heard the voice and walked in. When he saw the Yama Lord sitting at the table, he went forward and asked, Master, I've brought them here. Should I let them in now? Let them in. Yes. Yi's voice was tinged with excitement. He immediately went out and brought the two women in. The Yama Lord looked at him strangely. He really didn't know what he was excited about. What he didn't know was that a certain restless little thing was climbing up the tree to the roof and quietly climbing to the roof of the main house. Because the main courtyard of the Yama Lord's courtyard was empty except for the two guards guarding it, no one noticed the red figure on the roof. After Yi brought the two women in, he retreated, closed the door on the way, and guarded outside the courtyard with a grin. In the room, the Yama Lord looked at the two beautiful women. In his mind, he thought of the girl's disfigured face. His eyes flashed and he was a little distracted. Master, let this servant dry master's hair. One of the women said softly. She looked at the handsome man with eyes full of infatuation and joy. The Yama Lord came back to his senses, but when he saw that the woman was wearing a red dress, he frowned and said unhappily, Who allowed you to wear red clothes? He naturally released his pressure and the aura of a superior. The two women were so shocked that their legs went weak and they knelt down. Master, please forgive us. At this time, Fengjiu came to the roof and held his breath. He quietly lifted a tile and looked inside. He saw the two women trembling in front of the Yama Lord. She thought to herself, he really doesn't know how to be gentle with women. Get up and dry your hair. He calmed his face and tried to restrain his pressure. Yes, yes. The woman in red quickly responded. She got up and went to the screen to pick up a towel. She carefully helped him dry the water droplets on his hair. The Yama lord stared at the beautiful woman standing in front of him. He frowned and said, "You, come here." "Yes." The woman nodded and looked up at the Yama lord shyly. Then, she walked up to him. Yama lord stared at the slender waist in front of him and raised his hand to hug it. However, when he touched it, he felt that something was wrong. They were clearly the same woman with the same waist. Why did it feel different when he hugged it? When the woman saw Yen Zhu's grip on her waist tightened and loosened, she was overjoyed. She snuggled up to him and called out softly, "Master." As soon as the voice came out, his whole body was violently pushed away and fell to the ground in a sorry state. "Ah!" the woman exclaimed and fell to the ground. Her eyes were filled with tears. She looked at the man who suddenly changed his expression with a pitiful and timid look. When Yi heard the exclamation in the room, he quickly opened the door and ran in. What happened? However, when he saw the scene in the room, he was also a little dumbfounded. "Who allowed you to lean on me?" Yama lord stood up. The pressure and cold aura spread out from his body. It was so terrifying that the two women in the room trembled and knelt down. They didn't dare to raise their heads. Suddenly, a small sound came from the roof. Yama lord's eyes were cold. He shouted in a deep voice, "Who is it?" He gathered a palm wind and hit the roof. "Ah! You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.